Yes.
The lead Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1513 of the War News stream. And today was another eventful day, of course, because as always these days, it's always going off. But we're seeing today that Russia is apparently preparing to invade a NATO Baltic state in a wild statement they made today that we'll go over here shortly. Also, China is preparing to send Iran advanced radars, according to a recent U.S. intelligence report. And also, another big one, U.S. officials are now warning of a possible Russian satellite attack, which is also another crazy one today, and it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to give the past 24 hours of the news from around the world, as we have been able to hear of significant developments in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, East Asia, Western Europe, and the United States of America and the Americas in large. We have been able to hear that over the course of this day, the Russian Federation has openly threatened the Baltic States and Finland with the threat of an armed invasion due to an unbased allegation that the Baltic States and Finland have permitted Ukrainian armed forces to conduct drone attacks from inside of their airspace against the Russian Federation. Today, we were able to hear that the former Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, was the one to levy that threat against the Baltic States and Finland, and we've also been able to hear that simultaneously, the Swedish Chief of the Armed Forces has also stated that they are incredibly concerned that the Russian Federation might attempt a lightning offensive to seize the Gotland Island in the middle of the Baltic Sea, effectively creating a sea and air blockade of the Baltics if a larger war was to begin. Simultaneously, we've also been able to hear that within the area of the Middle East, news has emerged that the People's Republic of China, according to U.S. intelligence, is not only attempting to provide advanced MANPADS or man-portable air defense systems, but they are also attempting to provide advanced radar systems as well from the People's Liberation Army Arsenal's inventory. If this was to be provided to the Islamic Republic of Iran, we may see that some of their air defense capabilities are restored, possibly to the levels that they were at in their pre-war configuration, or maybe restored to some level that may pose a threat to future U.S. air operations if that war begins here soon. And it does appear that at this moment, war might might begin within the region at some point here in the near future. While a ceasefire was secured today between Israel and Hezbollah inside of Lebanon and the Lebanese government, it appears that the United States of America and Iran have been putting out statements over the course of the day on official government channels that appear to be indicating that both are believing that the continuation of the war is more likely than not after the 2-week ceasefire lapses here within the next several days. The Islamic Republic of Iran has openly stated that any U.S. ground invasion inside of their country by any capacity, measure, or form of any type will be met with stiff resistance, and they will attempt to kill all of the landing parties that the United States may drop off on Iran's shores. Meanwhile, both Iran and the United States' blockades are still going on inside the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman, and we have been able to see that the United States has continued to turn ships around at the U.S. blockade, and currently no ships, including Chinese vessels, have attempted to break the blockade or run the blockade at this very moment. We've also gotten larger statements that it appears that U.S. forces within the area, specifically those of the Navy, are apparently not getting the gravy, as pictures came out today from the USS Tripoli showing that their meals have the consistency of leather shoes. We've also been able to see reports that the USS Gerald R. Ford, as of today, has set the record for the longest carrier deployment since 1964, with the span of time the carrier's been on deployment being somewhere around 295 days in length. We've also seen that before the ceasefire went into effect today between Israel and Hezbollah conducted the largest rocket barrage that we had seen so far, very much at the last minute, to ensure that the Israelis would not really be able to conduct any sort of an effective counter. We've also been able to hear reports outside the Middle East and inside of Europe that it appears that the European Union is going to be greatly affected by the lack of fuel leaving the Strait of Hormuz, as the IEA states, or the International Energy Agency of the United Nations, states that the entirety of the European Union has about 6 weeks left of aviation-grade jet fuel before the entirety of the continent runs out. In that case, we will most likely see that all air traffic of a civil form for freight and passengers will most likely cease throughout the entirety of the continent, and we'll most likely see the flights will divert around the area, considering the complete lack of fuel within that specific category. We've also seen additionally that the Ukrainian armed forces have conducted irreparable damage to the Russian Federation's port of Tuapse within the Black Sea, with significant strikes hitting the oil loading facilities there and causing what can only be described as an absolute hellfire within the middle of the city. Ukrainian armed forces have also inflicted significant losses onto the Russian Federation's armed forces as well, stopping any advances over the course of the day and also striking deep behind their lines in occupied Ukraine, hitting further air defense systems and critical infrastructure and logistics throughout the entirety of the country. And we've also been able to hear, speaking of which, totally forgot about this one, folks, that the United States of America is possibly preparing for military actions against the communist Cubans, and the communist Cubans put out a training video today showing that they were well prepared for any U.S. amphibious landing. They whipped out the oxen and cart with a gush gun on the back. I'm not even kidding. We'll have to show you all that footage here in a little bit. And we also were able to see that an MQ-4 Triton was also conducting reconnaissance along the southern end of the Cuban island over the course of the day. We also heard that during a refit, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower had a small fire today. But outside of that, we have a humongous amount of news to cover, and of course, as the channel tradition dictates, we will be starting with our largest stories first, and then moving our way on down into the smaller stories throughout the night. We have quite a large amount of news today, and we are going to be trying to get to the largest stories regardless of sequence. But moving us on and into the major news that we have for the day, we are actually going to be moving first and foremost into the area of the Middle East. As many of you all know, we currently have two major news stories, and I'm not sure, or do we have news at the moment?
Yes, we have a little bit of news right now. It's not really breaking news, that's why I didn't put breaking in there, but we do have a little bit of news right now. I am seeing, because you did mention that there was an MQ-4C Triton lurking around Cuba. It does look like it's actually still lurking literally right off the coast, right next to Havana, which is the capital, and it's still there. Like, it's still doing racetracks like right outside of the capital city. So it's been lurking around all day long. It's been flying down toward Haiti. It'll fly all the way back up the Cuban coast, and it's still doing racetracks around the capital. So that's a pretty big deal. It's hanging out pretty much nonstop from the looks of it.
And that's fairly interesting to see, and we'll be making sure to cover that here later in more detail in our America's News segment, which will be up later on in the night. Moving us on out of that development and small update on the story that we'll be covering here in a little bit, we were able to hear of some significant developments throughout the entirety of the Middle East, as we have been able to see that over the course of the day, the United States of America's intelligence agencies have apparently been getting some concerning information and developments about the People's Republic of China's involvement in the current growing conflict, and also the fact that it appears that the ceasefire will most likely be lapsing here soon, and armed conflict will most likely begin between the two parties. According to U.S. intelligence, we have been able to assert that today, according to sources who spoke to CBS, they have detected that China is considering providing Iran with advanced radar systems. According to the information that was provided to CBS in some greater detail, the Chinese are planning on providing some of their more advanced but conventional radar systems to the Islamic Republic of Iran to be able to replace the ones that were largely destroyed during the first 5 weeks of the armed conflict that happened during the Iran war. If the Chinese were actually able to provide these, along with the MANPADS that we've heard that are somewhere down the pipeline at this moment and are going to be provided to Iran here within the near future, we may see that a significant portion of the Iranian air defense network is able to be replenished or at least restored to some operational capacity, meaning that once the armed conflict begins again, the United States might be somewhere around square one, at least as far as the air defense situation is concerned, and we may have to see an entirely brand new campaign of suppression of enemy air defense systems ongoing to see that the airspace is once again cleared out well enough to make it somewhat safe for U.S. aircraft to be able to conduct significant air operations throughout the entirety of the country. It also appears that these statements that we're hearing from U.S. intelligence also appear to be corroborated to some extent by the Iranian government's confidence right now, as the Iranian government's army spokesperson today stated that the Iranian army has been instructed that, in the event of an attack on the country involving a ground operation, not a single one of the aggressors will be left alive. Once again, leveraging significant threats of warlike actions against the United States of America if the war is to resume, and we do understand that these sorts of statements made prior about if the U.S. does this, we're going to do that, have generally been made by the Iranians whenever they believe that a military action would be inevitable of some kind. Similar statements like these were actually made by the Iranians right before the war started itself in its full form way back in the later part of February, where we heard that the Iranians were continuously stating that if the United States of America attempted to conduct any military actions against them, they would immediately blockade the Strait of Hormuz and try and bleed us dry economically. They then followed through on that after the United States attacked the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is leading us to believe that apparently the Iranians might have some information from somewhere, probably the Russians, that the United States of America might be working towards preparing a limited ground operation or a ground invasion of Iran to be able to try and forcibly clear the Strait of Hormuz. And we do understand that that is largely a developing and significant situation even at this moment right now. The Iranians are seeing that their blockade is still largely in effect right now inside the Strait of Hormuz. But right outside of that, the U.S. blockade, which apparently is skirting the area from the Pakistani to the Omani coast in a straight line throughout this area, is also in effect as well. And to be entirely frank with y'all, while we are seeing that fuel shortages are starting to grip some areas of the world, much like we were predicting, it doesn't really appear that the damage that the Iranians were hoping to inflict in a short period of time has coalesced yet from their blockade. It also doesn't appear that the U.S. blockade has really been able to produce much in physical damage to the Islamic Republic of Iran's economy yet, because it's been on such a small timetable. The U.S. blockade has only existed for about roughly a couple of days at this point, and no amount of economic damage from a blockade could be conducted in any significant form in a period of several days. For this reason, it appears that Iran and the United States of America are beginning to realize that their blockade initiatives may not be achieving the kind of devastating damage that they were looking for in a short period of time, and it looks like both sides might be realizing that the damage will eventually happen in significant form to both sides, but it's going to take far longer through the blockade model than both were anticipating. For this reason, the Iranians are now digging out significant amounts of their missile cities that have been hit across the entirety of the Islamic Republic of Iran, as the Secretary of Defense stated today that they are definitely digging out bombed-out launchers and missiles within the missile cities throughout the country to be able to try and restore some of their offensive missile capacity against the greater part of the Western world here in the Middle East. The fact that they are digging...
I wonder how they're going to get those out and actually recover and use them, because if they were destroyed, because, you know, obviously if they're buried, because the U.S. has been hitting these underground missile facilities left and right, as part of what they've been striking with the fighter jets in the area inside of Iran. It's like, what are they expecting to do? Pull out the rubble and somehow, you know, repair the missile launchers, or what are they expecting?
Well, generally, a lot of these missiles and missile launchers are actually intact because the United States didn't collapse the entirety of the tunnel networks in these missile cities. They only caved in the entrances, creating a very limited amount of damage that made the facilities physically inaccessible to Iranian forces, but still left a large amount of the inventory inside of them, such as the missiles and also the TELs, intact deeper within the tunnels where they're still accessible. Meaning that right now it's only a matter of digging out the tunnel entrances and walking inside, and you can probably go and access these vehicles and these missiles in their completely intact condition with basically no damage whatsoever. That's also what we were believing throughout the entirety of the war on the analysis side here on my end of the channel, as far as how that was working, is that the United States has been proven through the GBU-57 MOP to not be able to cause irreparable damage to Iranian tunnel networks and tunnel facilities, as the Iranians have generally dug them at a minimum depth of about 300 feet or lower. And from what we understand, the GBU-57 can only penetrate about 250 feet of ground before it explodes, meaning that a lot of these tunnels are right below or well below the threshold that a GBU-57 MOP could reach and hit. For that reason, any damage that would be caused to a tunnel network by the United States and its air campaigns would actually only be superficial in the best case scenario, as we would be able to drop a guided bomb directly near to the entrance of a tunnel and by the explosive force alone create a cave-in at the entrance that would make it to where you couldn't go into the tunnels, but most everything else well within the tunnel network itself would still be intact and operational. And just like we were expecting, the Iranians are attempting to dig out these facilities and try and find these missiles and TELs to once again make them accessible to the Iranian armed forces, to see that their offensive and defensive capacities are once again restored back to a similar level that it was to the pre-war, but it won't be to the exact level that it was to the pre-war, considering that they did have a significant amount of material losses on the surface in terms of missiles and also TELs throughout the entirety of the armed portion of the 5 weeks of this war that's happened so far.
Yeah, it seems to me that it's not really looking very positive, because I see OK State 42, a viewer in the live chat. He said this is why the ceasefire was nonsense. It pretty much only benefited Iran, and I mean this is part of the danger of a ceasefire. Like it allows Iran and the enemies to start doing stuff like this. They can start digging out missile launchers that they forgot about, or that they're possibly even mangled under the surface. They can try to pull those back out, and it appears to be that's what they're doing. From the satellite images we see, it looks like Iran is actively moving in earth-moving equipment to start removing the rubble basically from the entrances of these underground facilities, and this gave them the chance to do that. So I mean, the whole story that Iran's looking for peace, it really doesn't hold up when you see what they're doing right now during this temporary pause. It really looks like they're getting ready for another round of fighting, which is what we're also expecting from the United States forces, because we're seeing tons of forces still moving into the area, and pretty much all the analysts agree at this point that the U.S. would not be moving in so many more forces. And also, like we reported yesterday, moving in larger deployments of thousands of more troops into the area unless the war was going to be escalating here soon. So I think it's going to be escalating, and the ceasefire, like we've been saying, is probably just a temporary pause.
Also, I saw someone else in the chat, Timothy Crystal, say, I don't think the actual max depth, speaking of the GBU-57 MOP, is known publicly. And you're actually correct on that. Generally, the exact specifications of a weapon system, such as an airframe or an ordnance, are generally classified as far as the greater detail, and they generally give a ballpark figure to the public. However, we can deduce some common sense facts to give us an understanding of what the GBU-57s are capable of, and they're not capable of going below 300 feet. That we do know, because we have been able to see that in the prior strikes that were conducted in Operation Midnight Hammer in the summer of last year, that the U.S. strikes on the Qom uranium enrichment plant were not able to render irreparable damage to the tunnel networks and completely collapse them, from what we now know. Even U.S. intelligence has stated that at some point, and also due to the reason why we are conducting this war right now is because it turns out that Operation Midnight Hammer was not able to destroy those facilities in their entirety. And that lets us know that whatever the penetration qualities of the GBU-57 is in terms of feet of soil or rock, it is less than 300 feet, because it was not able to completely render inoperable the Qom uranium enrichment plant, which we already know at a base level is 300 feet below the surface of the mountain that it's currently built under. So that gives us an idea that the United States really can't hit a lot of these missile facilities, because most, if not all of them, not even the ones at Qom, just normal missile cities like the ones at Shiraz and Yazd, are several hundred feet under a mountain surface. And to show you all this here really quickly, because this is a very important side of our analysis here with these sorts of tunnel networks, is that if we look at this missile city right here, and I was able to get you all an elevation map, which we could easily do, you can actually see that around this area, there is about 400 feet of mountain on top of these tunnel entrances, meaning that the tunnel entrances, which you can physically see right, let me see here, I need to find one of these here really quickly to show them to y'all. Let's see, I believe they're further down. Yeah, like right here. These tunnel entrances are technically destroyable, and we can cave them in, along with this one right here, but we can't actually hit the tunnel itself that exists deep under this mountain, and that's where most of the missiles and the TELs are kept. Basically, none of them are kept near to the entrance, because obviously that is the weakest part of the structure. So most everything is shoved a little bit further back into the tunnels, so that way if a bomb hits, it'll cave in the entrance, the actual material will be intact, and then eventually the IRGC can come back through and excavate that entrance and reopen the tunnel, and then go in there and access the weapons. So generally,
like a little hide and go seek routine. It's a very like sneaky way of warfare. Like, put all your stuff underground. You know, obviously the U.S. comes in and bombs the hell out of the entrances. Then you have to sort of act like a rabbit by digging your way back into the hole to go get your equipment out. I mean, it's not exactly what you call a glorious form of warfare, but it seems to be that Iran probably is going to pull some out. I just personally doubt that they're all intact. Like, I think some of them might be mangled possibly, because I mean, they buried the entrances. I mean, there could be damage. There could have been maybe shockwave damage that happened to these launchers down below. So, you know, I'm still thinking there could be some mangling.
There probably could be some mingling, but I have a feeling that it's probably somewhat small, and most of the equipment is probably going to be recoverable, because generally the blast to create a cave-in would happen above the tunnel entrance, not in it. And so for that reason, most of the equipment wouldn't really be damaged, because most of the shrapnel and the explosive force went into the rock above the tunnel entrance, not into the tunnel itself. But outside of that, a lot of people are currently talking right now about what the Chinese might be providing to the Iranians, and whether or not the Chinese would provide these sorts of radar systems to the Iranians, or whether they wouldn't. And Matthew, what are people thinking about this right now, and what are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so this is another report that came out today, and keep in mind that originally there's been 3 different reports of China helping out Iran in some form or another. We've heard, of course, all the different reports at the very beginning of the war that China was sending a whole bunch of intelligence to Iran to target the United States. That was the first one. Then after that, we heard that apparently they were going to send MANPADS to Iran. That was another big one. Then we heard Russia was going to do that as well. Now we're hearing that advanced radar systems might also get sent, and here's the catch. The reports don't even know if they've sent them already or not. China might have already sent those equipment. We're not being told in these intelligence reports, and it's not being reported on in the mainstream media. So it's very possible that we're a little bit late to the game with this report, and it could be that China already sent it, or it's on the way, and we simply haven't gotten confirmation of it. So what are your thoughts? 47% said China will likely send them to Iran, while 38% said China likely already sent them, and 11% said China will probably not send it to Iran. And I would say, I think China's probably already sent it. That's my guess. Because if we're hearing about that right now in an intelligence report, then I would say it's probably a little bit late. And also, they even admitted in the report that they're not even sure if China sent them or not. So I would tend to lean toward it's probably on the way. That's my guess. And if we're hearing about it through this report, then it's probably there or getting there. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that in my honest opinion, folks, I'm just going to be a little bit upfront with you all. I think that they probably are already being sent at this moment right now. They're probably not there yet, because generally the Chinese are probably just replacing the ones that were lost. Because I have to tell you all this. It's very important for me to tell you all this. The Chinese already had sent Iran a lot of radars before this war started, and the U.S. blew most of them up. So advanced radar systems for China are just like a step above Russia's, which means that they might work, and if you had an elephant and attached wings to it and flung it right in front of the radar system about 50 feet away, it might pick it up. But most of the time, it's not going to pick it up. Because we had seen, folks, that the Iranians had been provided, much like Venezuela had been provided, China's most advanced radar systems before the war, which supposedly, according to the Chinese claims and marketing, were able to pick up F-35 Lightnings. they got blown up by F-35 Lightnings, and we have no indication they ever saw the F-35s coming. So for that reason, we're believing that generally the Chinese are sending replacements. They're not sending anything that would be new or incredibly advanced compared to what Iran already had, because they already had incredibly new and advanced radars that had been provided by China before the war. So this is largely replenishment of Iran's radar systems. Now, if this is provided to the Iranians, this will not be seeing that the situation becomes impossible for the United States. I want to make that one clear. It just sees that we return back to the situation that we had when the war started on day one, which is where the airspace is not secure. Technically, it's contested because they have radar systems to be able to pick up incoming aircraft and shoot them down in theory. So then we would have to once again conduct further suppression of enemy air defense operations to be able to clear out those radar systems, knock out most of the radar-based air defense as a result, and then start working on larger air-to-ground campaigns throughout the country after the seed operations have been conducted successfully. Meaning that this doesn't really do a lot to, say, shield Iran from future U.S. airstrikes. What it does do, though, is that it buys them a little bit of extra time before U.S. airstrikes are about to cause the maximum amount of damage in a continued war that is probably going to be coming up here very soon. So I hope that gives the best analysis I can, at least given the situation, because I'll be entirely frank with you all, I don't really think any amount of Chinese radars is going to be doing them a lot of help. I also saw someone say, oh, you've greatly underestimated the S-400. Oh,
What?
dude, come on.
What the
Come
hell?
on.
Hell no. No. I'm calling foul on that one. I mean, ask Venezuela about the Russian air defense system. Let's ask Venezuela. I don't think they worked that well. Let's ask Iran. I don't think it worked that well for Iran. Hell, let's ask Russia themselves. I don't think it worked too well for even Russia. There's no such thing as underestimate Russian air defense. There's no such thing. Like that's a myth.
For 4 years, like saying that to someone, like anyone in the world, might actually be true. Maybe there's a reason to say that to some other people. But here on this channel, we have been covering the war in Ukraine, which is where all of the S-400s are produced. They're produced in Russia for 4 years. And out of 4 years, I have never seen an S-400 work properly. Ever. All of them are defective. None of their missiles work. None of their radars work. They usually don't even pick up the aerial threats they're supposed to be shooting at. And the last time we saw one that was operational, which was in the Novorossiysk attack of about a week and a half ago, 2 S-400 missiles were fired from the battery down here on the coast, and they went flying right over the city and then slammed into some apartment buildings near the port. So I would generally say that underestimating the S-400, I would not underestimate Chinese weapon systems directly yet, because we just haven't had enough analysis yet to see how weak and incompetent they really are, or how strong and powerful they really are. So generally I would say don't underestimate Chinese air defenses, because we just don't have enough physical information on them yet. But with Russian air defenses, we have a literal thesaurus at this point of how they operate, and they operate poorly. I mean, you can underestimate an S-300, an S-400, or an S-500 every day of the week and probably be dead on the nail about how badly that thing's going to really perform. I mean, hell, they can't even shoot down an aircraft, much less a drone, or much less a stealth aircraft. It's not going to happen. But anyways, moving us on out of that, and moving us on into the other major news that we got out of the region today, we've also seen that the blockades are still ongoing by Iran and the United States within the Strait of Hormuz. We did get to see some sort of an odd fire happen today, just to point this out, on Suri Island. We could see a small amount of oil tanks here in the middle of this island caught on fire. We don't know why, to be completely frank with y'all. So take that for what y'all will. And we also saw that there was a little bit of marine traffic data that came out from the Strait of Hormuz today, showing that some passages were made, but I do want to make it incredibly clear, most of the ships were either Chinese-owned or they were Iranian-owned. So most of the ships that were kind of moving through and around the Strait of Hormuz are generally Iranian-aligned from what we can tell, and it appears that the flow of traffic is still an absolute trickle right now. And there's some of it. And as you can see, a lot of these vessels have Iranian names, or they have names like Nobler right there.
Nobler? What the hell?
I don't know. Hey, yo! Man, I don't know what that one's about, really.
Yeah, I don't either, by the way. Also, you said that there was a fire on one of Iran's islands with like the oil on it, the oil depot you said earlier?
Yeah, but I mean, it's like a little one, and it's in the middle of basically nowhere. It's Suri Island, I believe it's what it's called. It's this one right here.
Huh.
And it was one of these tanks that caught on fire just out of the blue.
They say the oil's hot. They say it's real hot on that island. That oil, it's so hot.
They say, hot, hot, oh, he's got it. But beyond that, I don't know what the fire was about. It doesn't really appear that it was from sabotage, espionage, an attack, or anything. It looks like that one might just sporadically happen in the midst of this all. Really convenient timing, to be honest, but it doesn't really look like there was much more to attach to that development, because I watched that one, folks, for a couple of hours after it happened, after I made my video today, and I was like, there's got to be something that happens with that, or some further information that comes out, and there was nothing, so it just appears to be a freak incident. But anyways, we were able to see that the U.S. blockade is also still ongoing over the day, and according to the Joint Chief of Staff General Kane, he actually showed how the U.S. interdiction is conducted. So to explain what we're seeing right here, we're seeing a formation of destroyers that are basically just hanging out. Well, this is relative to the time that this was happening. They're not sitting there all the time permanently. But also, I got to say, folks, these infographics here are actually on the par of my quality. And now y'all can kind of get when people come in here in Super Chat and they're like, I'm in the military, and this is a lot like a briefing. It's just that y'all aren't in the military. Now y'all can get the idea why, because the infographics and their quality is about as good as the ones here on the channel. But like,
the military never moved beyond Microsoft PowerPoint, and also they never learned how to do background remover, like on the logos and stuff. Like you can see, it's still got the white like background behind it instead of being like cut out with background remover. They never quite got there with those skills.
No.
But I will admit, though, I mean, it gets the information across. Like, you know, it's very straightforward. It's honestly better to have it simplistic than overly complex. So it does work.
It does work. It does get the point across. So let me show you what we're seeing right here. All of the vessels in red are not Iranian naval vessels. They're actually apparently Iranian or Iranian-aligned merchant vessels that were attempting to leave Chabahar in one big flood. So they break out of Chabahar and they start going for the blockade line. The U.S. warships then create basically an intersecting lane of fire, if we want to call it that. In naval terms, that doesn't really exist. But if you look at it, you have two Arleigh-Burkes here facing generally, well, it doesn't even matter where they face. I mean, like, all of these details don't really count, but they're technically facing towards the merchant ships that are trying to break the blockade. They have another ship down here, and if you look at where they're at, this actually creates an L-shaped zone of fire on these two vessels that have tried to break the blockade, which is technically an intersecting lane of fire. Does that matter in naval conflict? Not that much, but is it effective? Yes, it definitely is effective. They then told them to turn around or else they were going to get shot, and then they turned around, and then they went back to Chabahar, as you can see right there. All of them turned around and then went back to Chabahar, and then we were able to see that a decent amount of these destroyers then started to move back towards their staging area, which is somewhere around the northern part of the Arabian Sea. Outside of that, we also were able to hear a little bit of a radio transmission from one of these incidents, and also a video from one of the Seahawks that have been sent out to observe the tanker and ensure that it was going to turn around, which I'll show y'all right here.
Motor vessel Molly, this is warship 112. We will be escorting you to your next port of call. Thank you for your cooperation. This is warship 112, standing by at channel 16. Out.
And that appears to be
This is a nice gentleman, very polite. We'll be escorting you, good sir, back to your location of port. Please follow us. A very polite blockade, I must admit.
Man, it was a wonderful thing. We also were able to hear that according to the U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, ships sanctioned by the United States will now be subject to boarding, search, and seizure under the American blockade of Iranian ports. What's interesting about that, folks, is that the Rich Starry, which we've been talking about for a couple of days here, is actually on a U.S. sanctions registry. While it is technically not originating from an Iranian port right now, it is on the U.S. sanctions registry for loading Iranian oil and shipping it to China in 2023, which is why we're thinking that the Rich Starry hasn't exactly made the transit just yet. Here it is right here. It's actually sitting right off of the coast of Iran right now as they're trying to probably get some information from the Chinese Foreign Ministry as to how they're supposed to proceed. Whether they're supposed to try and wait this whole thing out or whether they should go and try and break the U.S. blockade. If they try and break the U.S. blockade, there are a couple of likely outcomes that could happen. And I'll try and tell y'all a little bit of what I would think the statistical chances of these opportunities would be, but I'll lay out each of them. One, and this is a decently likely one, is that the Rich Starry could challenge the blockade and then they make it through because they're a Chinese ship and we don't want to get into a larger issue with the Chinese for the larger part. The second chance is that it tries to break the blockade and then we turn it around and tell it to go back. Otherwise, it's going to be boarded and seized or it may be fired upon. And then it might just turn it back and go away. The third option is that it tries to break the blockade and we actually stop it and seize it and arrest the crew. if that happens, we could see that there is a I mean, that actually might be worse than any of the other options, because that might actually lead to a direct confrontation with the People's Republic of China, and that really wouldn't turn out to be a great scenario, at least for us right now, even with them trying to support the Islamic Republic of Iran with weaponry and such. That could start to create a larger global conflict out of the war with Iran, and that might not be our best intention at the moment, considering that we're just trying to get the Strait open and logistically secure our situation before we start to see the things escalate any farther. But outside of that, we have also been able to hear that apparently, while all this has been going on in between the Iranian blockade and the US blockade within the area, right now on board the USS Tripoli, things are going incredibly well, exceedingly well. But before we get into that, because it's kind of a bit of a comedic relief night here and there sometimes, we were able to hear that a lot of people are currently talking about the reports coming from U.S. Navy Central Command stating that they will be boarding, searching, and seizing sanctioned ships near the Strait of Hormuz. That's like a tongue twister. But a lot of people have been putting in their thoughts on that one. And Matthew, what are you thinking about it? And what is everyone else thinking about that as well?
All right, so the U.S. has decided to take it up and ratchet the situation up another notch because they already had the blockade going, and believe it or not, the blockade's actually going somewhat okay for now, but ultimately, though, the Strait of Hormuz is still blocked, so that's not good, but at least we haven't seen, shooting start between the Chinese and the American Navy. Thankfully, nothing like that's happened, and we've only seen really threats get lobbed from China toward the U.S., and that's been pretty much it for now. Hopefully, it stays that way, but now the U.S. is going to ratchet it up a little bit more. They're going to start boarding, searching, seizing sanctioned ships near Hormuz. And a lot of those sanctioned vessels are actually Chinese that are currently hanging out in the area. So, boarding, searching, seizing, I'm not sure about that with a Chinese vessel. It seems like it could cause things to get a little bit out of control. So, what are your thoughts? 43% said it sounds like an imminent crisis in the works, while 27% said it sounds like a great idea, very low risk, and 20% said, it probably won't happen. The U.S. will back off of that. And I would say, in its current form, if the U.S. carries something like this out, it probably will lead to a direct confrontation with China. This is the main thing that we were worried about when the U.S. announced this blockade, was a confrontation with China. And this right here almost guarantees it, because unless they're planning on not messing with the Chinese ships, and they're only going to mess with the Iranian ships, then maybe that will avert a crisis, maybe. But ultimately, though, there's a lot of Chinese vessels around that are sanctioned, and I think that will cause a problem. We're already seeing China lob the threats, and I think that'll cause it to go a little bit haywire. So I'm with the 43%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I'm with the 44%. It's definitely going to be an imminent crisis if we try and stop, seize, or search a Chinese vessel, because vessels at sea are generally given the same sovereign rights as the territory of a country is. So stopping a flagged vessel out of a country like, say, China is generally taking direct action against the sovereignty of the People's Republic of China, due to how international maritime law works in that regard. And that also means that they could start to create significant situations and incidents with the Chinese, which is something that we generally want to avoid right now. As far as war planning goes, folks, we never want to escalate a conflict into being a world war every time. And while a lot of people who would like to lean more into their emotions would like to see that happen, and I don't like the Chinese myself, or at least the People's Republic of China, to be a little bit more clear on that. I don't really like the Chinese government either. But at the same time, seeing that this war expands in scope to being a global conflict because we were trying to overthrow the Islamic regime to stop them from developing a nuclear weapon really isn't doing us a lot of favors. If anything, it's doing us a lot worse. The economic damage would become a lot more severe. Shipping lanes in the Pacific could be directly threatened by Chinese attack submarines. We could see that a lot of additional damage and impact could be happening around the world if we try and force a situation where China plays its hand and then gets involved in the conflict directly. We want to try and create as minimized and as a contained environment as we can. And for that reason, if a Chinese ship tries to break the blockade, it probably would be better to just let the thing through. And to be completely frank with y'all, in that sense, it didn't even really make a lot of a point in creating a blockade, because unless if we're willing to try and create a larger conflict with the Chinese right now, that isn't really a smart idea, and it would have been a lot better to just try and conduct, first and foremost, military actions to open the strait, or just bombing the oil loading ports or docks where these ships are loading up with oil, so that way they physically can access the oil. Whether or not that gives us a good negotiating chip later, that would probably be the situation that would lead to the smallest impact internationally, instead of seeing that we might be able to provoke a situation with the Chinese out of our blockade scenario currently ongoing. So I hope
But
that
yeah,
is.
you also had to remember the original objective that I could determine out of this blockade that the U.S. is currently conducting in the Strait of Hormuz is here's the objective. This is the overall goal. They're trying to put pressure on China and they're trying to put pressure on Iran to bring the war to a close by hurting both of those economies. Because by blockading the ships, the Iranians can't send out oil and petroleum to China, which should, in theory, make China put pressure on Iran to end the war. And obviously, if Iran can't sell their oil, they're not making money to keep their war effort going. But that, at the same time, requires a few different assumptions. Number one, it assumes that China and Russia are not voluntarily giving weapons to Iran to use them as a proxy against the United States to fight the war. That assumes that. And also, number two, it assumes that China is simply going to sit back and be passive and not attack or try to confront the blockade directly if it keeps up and goes on long term. So that was the objective behind it. But like we said before, the big problem with the blockade is China is likely not going to sit back forever. They're probably not going to do that because that's not the way China operates. So they'll probably jump in eventually. We're just waiting for it right now because China's lobbed the threats, but they haven't taken direct action yet. So we'll have to see.
And we will definitely have to wait and see. But moving us on out of the Middle East for a little while, and moving us on up into our other large major development of the day, we're actually going to be moving up towards the area of Finland and the Baltics, or generally the Baltic Sea at large, as we have been able to hear of some very concerning developments that came out today from the Russian Federation's government, which paired with their current economic condition is actually becoming a point of significant concern, at least on our analysis at the moment. The Russian Federation today has actually openly threatened the Baltic States over a allegation the Russians made some time ago. It was about a couple of months ago at this point, that Ukraine was being allowed the use of Baltic airspace to be able to conduct drone attacks inside of the Russian Federation and largely avoiding most, if not all, Russian air defenses in the process. We apparently also understand that Finland has been thrown into that batch as well, and according to the Russian Federation, Finland also has a similar agreement with the state of Ukraine to be able to conduct these attacks. While we know that this is a completely baseless claim by the Russian Federation did plant the seeds for this justification of a war several months prior, which we talked about on the channel, and we stated that while it probably won't mean anything at the time we were reporting it, it'll probably come back later to be somewhat important, and it actually ended up being somewhat important. We also have some additional details as to what was said and by who, as it turns out that Sergei Shoigu was apparently used as the envoy to the Baltic states to issue this threat, as he stated that Finland and the Baltic states may be generally conducting actions in support of the war against the Russian Federation, and this would give the Russians the right under Article 51 of the UN Charter to conduct military actions in its right to self-defense. According to Shoigu and his claims that he stated today, he stated that Ukrainian drones were flying through the Baltic states and Finland's airspace, and stated that Russia could respond accordingly, citing Article 51 of the UN Charter. Additional statement, or a translation by Nexta, stated that the Kremlin is openly hinting at potential strikes linked to NATO territory, which is a dangerous escalation. But generally, one thing that's most concerning about this is the news that also came out today simultaneously in the economic vein in Russia, not the strategic and foreign policy vein, but what came out in economics. According to a head economist inside the Russian Federation, Robert Nigmatulin, he stated today at an economic conference in the International Economic Forum in Moscow that Russia was heading for disaster and a double-digit economic decline, and stated that Russia needs to see urgent changes and the situation must drastically change for the Russian Federation's economy to survive or to rebound. Otherwise, the Russian Federation is most likely going to suffer an absolute economic collapse.
Holy cow. What, that guy right there is saying that, and he's in Russia, this guy is?
Yes, he actually said that in Moscow today.
Damn, that's a doozy there. That guy's a brave fellow to say that in Moscow. You really can't say things like that in Moscow because, Putin doesn't like you when people say things like that. They have, interesting things that sometimes happen when people mouth off like that. Although he is right, though, I will agree.
He certainly is correct, and it also appears that this is added on to some suspicions, which I'll actually take this marker, folks, and drag it over to Stockholm, because while it has to do a lot with the Russian strategic position right now, the statement was actually made by the chief of the Swedish army. We were able to hear that even according to the chief of the Swedish army, the army chief Michael Claesson, he told the Times today that the Kremlin wants to test the situation and see how the alliance would respond, especially after tensions between the United States and Europe. And the Swedish army chief is saying that they might test this by trying to seize a Baltic island like the island of Gotland, which could be taken by surprise via a sea or an airborne assault by the Russian armed forces. Swedish military intelligence also warned in a recent report that the threat from Russia will continue to grow throughout the future, at least from what they can tell at the moment right now. The Gotland Island is one that is actually quite concerning to hear, is currently being believed to be under threat by the Kingdom of Sweden. And to give you all a little bit of background information around Gotland Island, at least in its modern form as to how it pertained to a modern conflict, Gotland Island is actually considered to be the lighthouse and basically the bulwark of the defenses of the Baltic states. Because of its geographic location, it's almost smack dab in the middle of the Baltic Sea, meaning that whoever controls Gotland Island gets to place air defenses and anti-ship missile defenses on that island, which locks down the airspace and the surface of the Baltic Sea basically in its entirety. Meaning that if Gotland Island remains under NATO control, the surface fleet of the Russian Federation wouldn't be able to operate safely over the Baltic Sea, and we would also see that Russian aviation elements really wouldn't be able to operate there either. Now, on the flip side, though, if the Russians somehow conducted some sort of a surprise offensive and in a couple of hours took Gotland Island, they would be able to do the same thing, denying NATO from being able to move its navy and forces through the Baltic Sea, and also generally denying us the airspace, at least in some form, as we would have to start conducting suppression of enemy air defense operations against the island to try and at least open up the airspace around the Baltic, and then eventually clear out the Baltic to where we could start conducting shipborne operations with surface fleet vessels. If the Russians were able to secure Gotland Island, the Baltics would largely be blockaded by sea and air, meaning that their only connection to NATO would be through the Suwalki Gap. And if the Russian Federation was somehow also able to simultaneously close the Suwalki Gap, the Baltics would quite truly be besieged from land, sea, and air, and it would be pressingly difficult, if not very near impossible, for NATO to be able to conduct any reinforcements or resupplies or replenishment operations or sustainment operations of any NATO forces that would be in the Baltic pocket by that point in time, which is why this is a concerning situation, and one that is of significant concern given the fact that a top Russian economist today in Moscow even stated, with the danger that comes with this statement, that the Russian economy is on the verge of a near and total collapse, and that creates a perfect storm. Generally, the Russians would never conduct such a grave action as this in most normal circumstances, because it would end up destroying them equally in measure if they were able to destroy us in the larger picture. And that's why it's not a smart idea to do. However, if the Russian Federation's government is looking at a sheer economic collapse that may destabilize the government to where Putin and his cronies are overthrown, then as far as they're concerned, they're basically already dead if that happens. And if they're basically already dead, if the Russian economy suffers a complete collapse and they somehow get ousted, what does it matter if they're basically dead that way or if they're basically dead in a war with NATO? And so now they're possibly trying to see about pulling out the wild card option, which is creating a larger conventional war with NATO and then using the pressure of possible tactical nuclear weapons being used on that battlefield to see that they might be able to force NATO into giving them some significant concessions, ending the war in Ukraine and also the war with NATO in one fell swoop, largely to some degree to Russia's advantage, at least economically, to where the situation in Russia can be stabilized internally and the Putin regime and his government would be able to survive until it reaches the end of its time, which is when Putin will most likely croak, which who knows when that could be. That might be next year. But a lot of people are currently talking about what is going on with this Russian threat of self-defense and whatnot against the Baltic states and Finland. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that right now, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so this is becoming very precarious. I see a lot of people in the chat writing this one off, and generally, I would agree with most of those people. I would generally say that it's just Russia fear-mongering and also just trying to simply intimidate the West. But we need to look at this one a little bit differently because this time the circumstances are a little bit different. Right now, Russia is setting up multiple different narratives to possibly attack the Baltics and NATO. They're doing them all at once, which is different than the previous times. That's a little bit different. Right now, we're seeing that yesterday, the Russian Ministry of Defense came out and said that Europe is helping to build the drone infrastructure for Ukraine to fight the Russian Federation, and they listed off a whole bunch of addresses of places that could be targets if Russia chose to carry out attacks inside of Europe. So that's concerning. And now we're seeing that once again, they're repeating this lie that the Baltic states are allegedly allowing their airspace to be used for drone attacks on Russia by Ukraine, which is another crazy lie that Russia's putting out. So they've got multiple different narratives they're setting up for a possible provocation against NATO, which is very unusual to see this many at one time. And also, we are seeing the active weakening of the NATO alliance as we speak. Right now, because of U.S. tensions with Europe, NATO is not very cohesive. So it's changed dramatically over the past few months, and I think that's emboldening Russia, and that's why we're seeing this happen right now. And on top of that, to make the matter even more concerning, Russia just passed a brand new law for self-defense, which gives Putin the ability to deploy troops abroad, that is, anywhere he needs to defend Russia preemptively. So it's literally looking pretty bad. I will admit, not trying to freak people out. It's not looking good though. So I'm with the 38%. I think Russia is setting up an attack. I see that 39% said Russia's trying to scare NATO, and about 18% said Russia's testing the U.S. resolve. I'm confidently with the 38%. I think Russia is setting up an attack, and they are taking advantage of the distraction with Iran, and they're thinking about pulling something off. So not good. And I'm seeing some people also say in the chat that, how can Russia even do something like this? They don't have missiles, they're out of manpower and things like that. Here's the catch. Russia is conscripting people nonstop. They've been doing that the entire war. So they have manpower. Granted, they're not well trained, but they have bodies to throw at the situation. They also have missiles, and they're also still getting help from China when it comes to that situation. So, they have the ability. It would be not the wildest attack you've ever seen, but it could be an attack nonetheless. So, Enforcer, what say you?
I wanted to say that I'm with the 38%, that Russia is setting up an attack against NATO to be executed upon at some point here in the future. Due to their dire economic situation, this is most likely a last resort by the Russians to try and stabilize their situation before it becomes absolutely unrecoverable for the current government in Russia. We have to put in mind, folks, and this is something that people bring up time and time again, and many people miss the point on this one, which I got to say, I have to say this over and over for that reason, that Russia militarily has been destroyed by the Ukrainians over the last 4 years. How do they ever plan on winning against NATO? And the fact of the matter is that they've never planned on winning against NATO, and in this military confrontation right now, they don't plan on winning against NATO. Here's the situation with the Russians. Their military has sucked ever since the Soviet Union collapsed. They've known that, and we've known that. They know that if they ever try and go up in a war against us, even in 2015, if that happened, we would beat the shit out of them. No question at all, and that was when they were at their peak for the larger part militarily, from what we know. Now, on the other hand, though, is that if you beat their ass hard enough, they can just nuke you. So it doesn't matter how well they win the war conventionally or how badly they lose it. At the end of it all, they get to threaten using nuclear weapons, which is their goal. A lot like countries like North Korea lean heavily on their nuclear weaponry because they know that their conventional army doesn't stand a chance, and those nuclear weapons are able to give them a significant amount of leverage through fear of the consequences of using that nuclear weapon. The Russians do a very similar strategy. They thought Ukraine was going to be an easy country to fight and they were going to collapse in 3 days. That's the only reason they fought that war, is because they thought that their conventional army would never have to truly fight the thing. 4 years later, they're still fighting it, and they're dying in mass because of it, because they were never made to fight an actual war like that, and they knew that that was going to be the case as well. Same thing with NATO. They do not have to win the ground war to be able to see that significant leverage is taken against us. All they have to do is start shooting across the border, and then we start shooting back, and once we start shooting back, The Russians will try and conduct a little ground offensive into the Baltics, maybe close the Suwalki Gap. That might work for a couple of weeks, and then the NATO counterattacks are probably going to start busting on through that, and then we're going to start counterattacking possibly into Russia. Once that happens, the Russians have the existential threat to the state card to play, and that card allows them to threaten the use of nuclear weaponry by any measure, whether it be tactical or strategic. And they would, of course, start with tactical nuclear weaponry. So they would start sending us threats. Y'all are pushing into Russia. This is an existential threat to the state. We are going to start using tactical nuclear weapons. Tactical nuclear weapons usage is going to happen. Then they might actually use one. And we have to sit there and we have to blink or play chicken with them. We either have to call the bluff. They might not ever use a nuke somehow, some way. That's highly unlikely. Or they're probably going to use it, and we don't know when their threshold is or where their threshold is to where they'll start using tactical nuclear weapons. And then we have to go, do we want to create a nuclear war over this situation, or do we want to just try and find some way to negotiate out of this with the Russians and settle this whole thing so that way it doesn't end up becoming a nuclear war? And then that's where the Russians get us. That's the plan right now.
So you think the U.S. would be involved if Russia, let's say, for example, Russia decided to do a raid on Gotland Island and somehow they got into a fight for that island and they started fighting NATO? Do you think the United States would get involved? Because me personally, I have some doubts about that. The U.S. has been saying that NATO has not been there for the United States, so the U.S. won't be there for NATO. That's what they've been saying so far. And I think that might be part of the reason that we're seeing Putin make these wild threats and also the Russian government make these threats is because they've basically gotten permission to a large degree. Now that the U.S. is kind of bowing out of the situation, now all they have to contend with, if the U.S. is not involved, is Sweden, maybe some of the NATO partners, depending on how fast they get involved. So that might be encouraging them a bit.
It might be encouraging them to some degree. I have a feeling, though, that Europe will most likely unify against a threat like that and fight Russia in combined force, whether the U.S. is there or not. We definitely know that the British would, and we definitely know that the French would at a minimum. And as far as they're involved, that now becomes a war between two nuclear powers, well, more so three at that point, which then generally stabilizes the situation once again. And with the combined ground forces in Europe, and the combined air forces in Europe, they have more than enough firepower to deal with the Russians on their own. Regardless of what the president says, the president doesn't know what he's talking about, folks, about him saying that they don't have a navy and an air force and whatnot. They have combined in the entirety of the European contingent of NATO, the largest air force, army, navy, and so on in the entirety of the world, only second to the United States. So that all is just straight up BS. The Europeans alone would start curb stomping the Russians about as easily as they would whether the U.S. was involved or not. And then that would still create the same situation that the Russians are looking for, where they could then just threaten Europe alone with a nuclear reprisal, and then that would most likely get everyone to the negotiating table, and concessions would be given to the Russians, possibly like the lifting of sanctions and whatnot, which would economically stabilize their condition. The Russians would finally be able to piece out of the conflict with a claimed victory, and then things would start to stabilize within the region, probably, or at least that's what the Russians' plan would most likely be.
Maybe so. It just seems really precarious to me. And I'm putting up another poll about this, by the way, to ask about a possibility of an invasion of the Baltics. But, we've written this off. Like, I will agree. Like, when we've written this off in the past, we've generally sort of said, Russia probably can't do that. They'd be overextending because, of course, NATO is going to show up. The U.S. is going to show up. And it's going to turn into a bloodbath, basically, once that starts happening. But under the current circumstances, with NATO not being very cohesive right now, that's the only thing that was generally holding Vladimir Putin back from doing something to a large degree, because he doesn't have to have the world's most powerful military to start a situation with NATO. Like the enforcer was mentioning a minute ago, he can simply start something with airstrikes. He can do a raid on Gotland Island. It can start with something small and then turn into something much larger if they want to take it there. So, it all hinges on whether or not the U.S. is going to get involved or not.
And also, by the way, I see some people saying, but does Europe have a navy? And I really hate having to answer this question, folks, because if y'all ever listen to the President of the United States for any sort of factual information, you're going to be sorely amiss on really knowing much of anything. But as far as it goes with Europe, Europe has one of the largest navies in the world. If we took the entirety of all the European states that had navies and we clumped them together, they actually have a navy in terms of hulls in the water that's larger than the U.S. Navy. The U.S. only has about 440 seafaring vessels in the United States Navy. France, actually Italy alone, has about 240 operational ships in their navy. Europe, as a combined force, has 6 aircraft carriers. There's no country on the planet that comes close to that except for the United States. China only has two right now, and they're working on a third one. Russia doesn't have a single aircraft carrier, much less does Russia actually have an operational navy. I mean, if anyone ought to be putting any fingers at a navy that's completely inoperable, it's not really the British. I mean, the British have 1990s era and 2000s era warships that are inoperable. Russia has tons of 1970s era warships that are basically useless, and the only thing that works on them is the rudder and the propulsion to be able to get the thing underway and make it look like a threat. But beyond that, most of the weapon systems don't work on board. The Europeans would eat the Russians for lunch about every single day in the conventional sense. The one way though that they might really get hit or really hurt a good bit by the Russians is because the Russians do have a significant advantage in drone warfare relative to the Europeans, because the Europeans inexperience in that form of war. But the Europeans could still generally stabilize the situation through conventional forces, although they would still take pretty decent losses in a ground war, much like we would if we got involved in Europe as well, also due to our inexperience in drone warfare. So I hope that does address that side of things somewhat well, because it just to continuously try and put this up front, the Europeans are not weak. And when people say that they're weak, well, relative to who? And if we try and compare the Europeans to anyone in the world but the United States, the Europeans have more firepower and more forces in every way than any other country on the planet. They would be able to deal with the Russians, but still it would end up with the same sort of a situation. But with that, a lot of people are currently talking about this bull that we have at the moment, about the Russians possibly trying to conduct some form of an armed invasion into NATO as a last resort to see that they might be able to stabilize their situation by ramping it up to the max and then bringing it back down from there. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so on the invasion odds of the Baltics, it looks like the audience is almost exactly split in half on this one. Very unusual to see a poll exactly split in half, but it looks like 38% say there's a high risk of invasion, and 38% said there's a low risk of any attack, and only 14% said there's a high risk of airstrikes alone. So, I mean, at this point, like I said before, I think the risk is definitely rising pretty quickly, and it's not fear-mongering. This is something that should be watched very closely, and really the main thing that I would advise out of this entire situation is Europe needs to quickly make sure that they have a cohesive plan to defend the Baltics, because if they cannot rely on the United States to show up, which at this point I'm not sure if they really can with 100% certainty, they need to have a contingency plan in place to defend their allies in Europe, obviously, the Baltic States, which are NATO members, with arms of force. They need to be ready to do that. Right now, it appears to be that they're generally able to do that, but I'm not sure if they're really ready for it without U.S. help, because I think a lot of the plans that they have sort of are contingent on the U.S. being involved with the situation. So I'm with the 38%. I think the risk is definitely getting pretty high. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that there is definitely a high risk of invasion at this point. Back in the day, several years ago, we would have stated that the risk was wildly low. As a matter of fact, statistically, it was largely non-existent. But as the situation has worsened for the Russians in both the strategic and economic sense, the risk is increasing with each passing year. And I would say that at this moment right now, these sorts of threats being issued by the Russian Federation should be taken seriously, because they're probably at a point that they might try and act out on these at some point in the future. Probably within the end of this year or the next year, I would assume. And we will really start to tell, and this is the best way that we'll ever be able to get an indication that's going to happen, if we start to see some decent buildups of Russian forces in a training exercise in Belarus again, or along the Baltic border or Finland, and they're claiming that it's a military exercise that those forces are moving into the area for, that is pretty much going to be our telltale sign that they're getting ready to start an armed invasion of NATO. Because that's exactly what they did leading up to the war in Ukraine, and that's basically what everyone does before they start a war, is to move the forces into the area. They claim it's a war game, and then they launch an attack. And so I generally think that that's probably the reason, the general sign that we're going to see that will let us know that the war is definitely going to be coming on, and quite soon, is once we start to see those sorts of forces moving near to a border area. But
well, you heard that Russia is deploying about 20,000 more men. They claim that they're heading toward eastern Ukraine to try to take some areas quickly on the front lines. That's what they're claiming. But Russia is actively preparing a 20,000 man strong deployment, and they're claiming it's to eastern Ukraine, but nobody's really sure exactly where they're going.
I would have to say, yeah, that is true. But 20,000 troops isn't really a large force. That's actually somewhat small. Like they say, like, by the way, folks, we're going to be getting into that later tonight. The Russians say they're sending 20,000 troops to go and try and take the entirety of Donetsk in by the end of September. But it's taken about 60,000 dead in, I believe it's what was the town, Avdiivka alone, to take it, so that's kind of a little bit too small of a number. They probably need about a couple of 100,000 more men over about the course of the next 2 years to actually try and take the entirety of the remainder of Donetsk. And even then, that might be fairly difficult for the Russians to pull off, considering that they're at the complete disadvantage compared to the Ukrainians on the battlefield at this point, and it's still a stalemate, but not in their favor. But moving us on out of that, we are going to be getting on into the rest of our news back in the Middle East, now that we've covered the major developments that came out of Europe today. But before we get into that, I do have to say a humongous thanks to everyone who's been watching the channel so far tonight. At the peak tonight, we had 20,000 people here. That's quite a lot of people. And we also had 89,000 people watch the stream so far in the first hour and 10 minutes. I've got to say that we're massively appreciative of so many of y'all enjoying this channel and watching it, because we always pride ourselves on trying to cover the highest quality news and also having the best analysis to boot to give a better idea of how things are going right now and where they might be heading in the future based off of what we're seeing today. I have to thank you all greatly once again if you're watching so far, and we're about to be moving on to the rest of our major news from around the world in the Middle East, in Europe, and the Americas. But before we move on into that, I do want to take a brief moment to be able to talk to at least 3 of y'all and get 3 questions from the chat. So Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so starting off with our first of 3 super chats. This one goes to none other than Fred Vreeman. And thank you very much, Fred, for that $50 support. A generous support, by the way. And so far, that is the largest super chat of the night. And we do appreciate that. And that does help to keep the channel running. And Fred said, it's pretty difficult to imagine the IRGC can retrieve enough weapons to repel any US or IDF. Great show today. And any comment on the news of Saudi EW pipe now at 7 million barrels per day by converting parallel gasoline and a parallel pipe, plus a second Kuwait-Saudi-Israel pipe being planned.
And a huge thanks to you for the incredible support, Fred Freeman. And I have to say, generally the IRGC might be able to recover some of its situation or some of its conditions that it had before the war, but it's never going to be back up to 100% capacity like it was on day one of the war. That will probably never happen, in my honest opinion. So they might be able to get a little bit of help from the Russians over these few days of the end of the ceasefire. And we might be able to see they get a little bit of help from the Chinese, but it's not really going to help them out a great deal. And the United States, at a minimum, will be able to achieve air superiority once again over the skies of Iran. As far as the second part, however, we do have news of that Saudi pipeline, and we actually knew about that one before the war. There is, I believe it's called the East-West pipeline over Saudi Arabia, which is able to transport 7 million barrels of oil per day out of about the 12 million barrels that Saudi Arabia produces as a country. I believe it's actually around 11, if I'm not mistaken. But beside that, though, only 5 billion barrels of that makes it out of the country. About 2 million barrels of that is actually kept inside of Saudi Arabia and is used for their own domestic consumption, but the other 5 million is loaded up at ports like Jeddah, and then it's shipped on out of the Red Sea and into the greater world. And that was made to try and shorten up the logistics supply routes and make the general supply chain or the supply side inside of Saudi Arabia working a little bit faster by offloading the oil a little bit quicker and shortening some of the routes to Europe. But generally, it's not able to completely supplant all of the oil production inside the Middle East. Right now, we have heard that a lot of Gulf states are currently exploring options to build pipelines through Saudi Arabia to their west coast and the Red Sea to try and transport their oil over there and then load it onto a ship. But so far, a lot of those are only in the planning and haven't even gotten close to breaking ground at this moment or laying a pipeline, meaning that it'll still be a good ways away, probably a year or two, before we see any of those pipelines laid and operational. Still, it will.
And it wasn't it. And also, wasn't it through the Strait of Hormuz alone? I think there was like an average of like 20 million barrels per day of crude oil and oil products going through the strait pretty much daily. So, I mean the pipeline through Saudi Arabia, from what I know, apparently is only 7 million. And a good chunk of that goes to Saudi Arabia itself, actually. So it doesn't actually just go for export. So it puts a dent in it, but it's like, it's not really like, it's not going to fix the problem, but it definitely puts a dent in it.
Basically, it gets out, for Saudi Arabia alone, it gets out about 40% of their total oil production into the outside world, that one pipeline does. But the problem with that is, though, is that none of the other Gulf states can get any of their oil out because they don't have a pipeline to do it with, and they just work off of their ports that access the Strait of Hormuz as their egress. So generally, they are trying to work on pipelines in some of the Gulf states that will head to the Saudi west coast, but we don't really think that those are going to be around anytime soon. It'll probably take 2 years for those to reach completion and operation. And so that means that at the moment, we still, unfortunately, have to deal with Hormuz in its situation right now as a significant quagmire. But luckily, in the future, once those pipelines are built, if they are still pursued after this conflict ends and the Strait of Hormuz is reopened, if they're still pursued, that means that if the Iranians try this again, the impact is going to be nearly non-existent, because either they will just be able to divert most of their production through those pipelines, or they will just generally see that the situation won't happen again because the Iranian government will not exist in the current form it does right now. So a big thanks to you so much for the incredible support and help of this channel to keep on running. And I hope that does address that incredibly well, Fred Freeman. And a huge thanks to you so much for enjoying this channel and helping it to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
We also have a $20 support from Wubba Actual, and thank you very much, Wubba, for that 20. And they said the price of coffee is going up, but I hope the Costco chickens are holding their price. And they are, I think, holding their price pretty well. The last time I got one, I think was like 5 days ago. I think it was the same price, thankfully. I got the jumbo one. I think they vary in size. I think they're supposed to all be the same size, but like the last time I got one, I think it was like smaller or something, or at least I thought it was smaller. But the last one I got was like a jumbo chicken, one of those extra large. I like those extra large chicken. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that chicken is staying stable price. I actually haven't gotten a Costco chicken in a minute. I actually haven't really been to Costco in a minute either. I've just been on that hiking craze, folks, and also on that working craze too. And I just haven't had enough time to get out and go do that. So generally, I've just been getting like a pizza and then making that last for like 4 meals at a time. And that's how I've been trying to finance eating. Honestly, crazy enough, folks, that's about cheaper, crazily enough, than going to the store, because I did the math. It costs about, I think it's something like $120 a week to get pizzas and just eat those basically for every meal, and it costs about the same to get a smaller amount of groceries from Costco and be able to eat on them for like 3 days before I run out of food and then have to go to Costco again. Kind of crazy with that. Like I gotta be completely upfront with y'all. It's actually cheaper these days just to get a pizza and just eat that as all of your meals than it is to go to the grocery store. Who would have ever thought? But outside of that, though, I do have to say that I would love to have my hands on a succulent Costco chicken. Costco chickens are the juiciest, the most delectable, the most delicious. They're great, and I really need to go get one again. But a humongous thanks to you so much once again for the support, Wubba Actual. And I gotta say that hopefully I'll be able to get a nice, affordable bag of coffee here soon, because my bag of coffee that I have right now is running out. But a huge thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to be getting on into the rest of the news for the night.
All right, and this one goes to OK State 42, and thank you, OK State, for that $20 support as well, and helping to keep the channel running. And he said, I'm so frustrated with the ceasefire. The obsession with negotiating with these maniacs is the definition of insanity, in OK State's opinion. He said, doing the same crap over and over, expecting a different result, and the ceasefire pretty much only helped Iran reorganize.
I would generally agree with that, OK State. I don't really think that a ceasefire was a smart idea given the current situation, because the ceasefire was made with the idea that this would allow us to round out the war, but Iran is not in a position, from what we know right now, to where they're willing to round out the conflict, because they have a significant amount of leverage on us, and they're going to keep on trying to use that leverage to squeeze us to get something out of us, meaning that we're not going to be able to meet them in the middle, because we're squeezing them to make them agree to our demands, and they're trying to squeeze us to make us agree to their demands. So clearly we're at an impasse, and creating a ceasefire at that point wouldn't really be logical. It would be better to continue military operations against Iran until we open up the Strait of Hormuz and completely remove the leverage they have on us that they're trying to squeeze us with, to where the only people squeezing anyone would be us squeezing the Iranians. And then we could go into negotiations and see that they would have to meet our demands. Otherwise, things are going to continue to get worse for them with no hopes of improving in their situation. So I got to thank you incredibly for that support and helping this channel to keep it running, because I would generally say I think that it was quite a mistake as well, and I don't know why we even tried to create a ceasefire at this point in the war with the circumstances that we had at that moment to try and end the thing. Clearly it wasn't going to end. But with that, we actually apparently have some news, or quote, got some news. And Matthew, what do we got?
I think I need a classification system for my breaking news announcements because, most of the time it doesn't really meet up to breaking news, but it's more like it's news, but it's not necessarily breaking. But nonetheless, though, here's the news I have. We are seeing, it appears to be on Flight Radar 24, that we're seeing a pretty large conga line of aircraft that are apparently moving between Europe and the Middle East, and it looks like two of them just left an Israeli air base that we can see here on Flight Radar 24. So there's another large sign of movement between the U.S. Forces inside the Middle East and Europe, and it looks to be that it is still picking up, or at least it's maintaining the frequency that we'd seen before. If I can find the right language to use, of course, English, it's a hard thing. But as you can see, though, pretty big. But Enforcer, what say you?
Quite the airlift right here. Let's take a look at that over here. Oh yeah, look at them. They're still flying right now. So we do have an airlift that's going on at the moment. That's crazy right there, folks. It's an airlift that's going on. It's either sustainment or replenishment or reinforcements. We're not really sure, but we'll probably find out here in the next few days once the U.S. starts its military operations once more, or the Iranians do. We'll really figure out what it was for then. But still, a very interesting development to see right there, folks, those aircraft flying around. And with that, it is time for us to move on and into the rest of the news. But before we do, I do have one bonus question. And let's see here. Someone said, let's see here. Hold up. I need to find it. Dang, man, I always have it and then I miss it. Someone said, well, how much, I'll just take this one really quickly because I got to grab something at this point. How much does a pound of coffee cost for you? I actually don't know because I buy it in like a little Starbucks bag. It's like the Pike Roast bag that they give. I don't know the size of it either, but it costed the last time I got it was like $24. And it's lasted me a good bit. It's lasted me over a month or so at this point. So it's getting about a third full, but that's about all I know at this moment. So I don't know how big that bag is and how many pounds of coffee that is, but that's about the running price for the last time I got it. Hopefully it hasn't gone up a lot. But moving us on from that, it is time for us to get on into the rest of our news within the Middle East and around the rest of the world. Moving us on into Iran for story time, we've been able to see something that was truly comical today. The Iranian chief of the army came out, the commander-in-chief, which, I'm not going to lie, folks, with like the white hair and the beard, he doesn't really look like the commander-in-chief of an army. But outside of that, he stated the following today on Iranian State News. We had set up an ambush for the Americans south of Isfahan. All intelligence elements were ready. The army, the IRGC, the police, the besieged, and local residents collapsed on the enemy. And with the first shot, the C-130 came down. It's a great story. It's just that it's full of shit. Like, this never happened.
Who the hell's he fooling? Does this guy not realize that the U.S. went in and set up a forward operating base right outside of Isfahan when we recovered our F-15 weapons officer? We literally had a whole base set up in an enemy country right under their noses, and the Iranians didn't do anything about it whatsoever. They showed up to try to go find the pilot, but they didn't try to do anything to the actual forward operating base that we set up. And he's talking about come on, man, this dude's crazy.
Man, listen to him talk about it.
آماده که ممکنه در اصفهان اینها بخوان
Bro, he's making this whole dramatic deal out of it, like with a hand sweeping and everything. It's like, dude, you didn't do any of that. That is just straight BS. One, first off, there was no C-130s that ever flew near Isfahan. Never happened. Two, the army, the IRGC, the police, the besieged, and the local residents all being in some sort of joint command, that didn't happen either. Collapsing on the enemy? Well, they certainly collapsed. I mean, they completely failed to capture the pilot, or the WSO if we want to be technical. So they completely collapsed on that. I mean, they failed on that one. But outside of that, an ambush set up for the Americans south of Isfahan. My question, as far as that story goes, is how long were they waiting? Because there was nothing that happened south of Isfahan with any C-130s or ground forces or nothing. Y'all know where all that happened? It happened down here near Avaj and kind of like Ramormaz, right out here somewhere. That's where most of the situation happened with the missing WSO, way down here. How far away is that from Isfahan? That is 120 miles. So if that's just south of Isfahan, well, St. George is just south of Salt Lake, apparently, because St. George, at the bottom of Utah, I think is about the same distance from us. So, I mean, hell, like, we just heard about something happening just south of us, folks. It was only 120 miles away. But anyways, moving on from that, and that crazy statement, we do have to get to the Navy news, folks, because we have to talk about the Navy. And the old saying, folks, is that the Navy gets the gravy. Well, I don't know about that one, because we were able to see that a picture came out today from a disgruntled employee of the Department of Defense on board the USS Tripoli, who apparently took pictures of the food that they were being provided on board the ship. To let y'all know, before we even show y'all the picture, right now, these vessels are not getting underway replenishments at the expected rate that they're supposed to. And stocks in terms of food and usable supplies are starting to run low on board some of these larger vessels like the Tripoli. For this reason, they are having to start conducting rationing of their food sources on board the vessel, meaning that people are getting smaller portions, and also the menu variety is quite small. But I have never seen a menu variety this small. We were able to see that one soldier was provided small diced carrots, a burnt piece of cow, and the sole of a leather shoe.
Yikes. Is that Spam?
No, Spam does not have that color. That's like gray. That's like Spam is pink. This is gray.
Yikes. That patty right there looks like something we got fed in public school right there on the right. That does look familiar a little bit, but I don't remember it looking so jagged like that though. But also, by the way, I mean, good Lord. I mean, that is literally a prison tray right there. And also, what really is that thing right there on the left? I mean, that leather looking substance. What is that?
I don't know. I have no clue, man. I do not know what the hell that is. Someone said it's a Euro meat slice. I have never seen a Euro meat slice look like that. Y'all, let me go pull this up here really quickly.
Someone said that's soul food spelled like a sole of a shoe.
That's what it was. Like, you know, then they boiled it and threw it on a plate.
Oh man, honestly, it's kind of tragic though. Is I hate the soldiers having to eat that crap because they're on a crazy long deployment. Now they're eating doo-doo for like dinner. It's like that's pretty awful.
Well, crazily enough, man, this is better than the other picture I'm about to show you. This guy got a tiny little slopping of pork and one tortilla, and that's the full meal.
How's that's not even enough to sustain somebody. I mean, that's not enough calories for that. I mean, you have to have 2,000 calories a day, like if you're doing normal activities. These guys, I presume, are active all day long. So, I mean, this isn't enough to maintain their calories, pretty much.
Hell no. Like, this is what could that be, man? Like 300 calories, 400 calories for a meal? If they had 3 of those a day, meals of the size, these soldiers, well, sailors more so on the Tripoli right now, and the Marines, they're only getting about 900 to 1,100 calories maybe of food a day. That's crazily enough, folks, that is worse than the French prisoners of the Germans that were working in French labor camps in the Second World War, which were usually only fed 1,200 calories a day. So, I mean, this is pretty abysmal. I'm not going to lie. This is pretty rough. And the reason why we're saying this, folks, is because I know people in the armed forces, and I know people who are in the Navy and other branches and the Space Force and whatnot, and this is quite abysmal to look at our service members who are having to fight this war that is within our national interest, not being fed appropriate meals or appropriate portions. I'm not saying they need to eat like royalty, but I'm at least saying that they need to have a calorically sufficient diet while they're on their duty stations and deployments overseas. And this is something that isn't really looking all that good. But moving us on out of that.
Also, by the way, like I see some people calling it fake news. I mean, it was, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was reported by a mainstream media outlet, I believe. I don't want to name them because I don't remember them right off the bat, but it's not just like some random photo that's running around. To my knowledge, it appears to have been sourced to the large degree. So, I mean, I thought it might have been fake at first myself. I was looking at it thinking, wow, like I haven't seen food like that even get served in public schools, and that food was rough. I can attest to that myself. I used to eat it. But this right there, I mean, if that's really what they're getting fed, that's crazy work.
Also, I know that a lot of people want to say that because it looks bad for the American image for that to happen. But I know many people folks who served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and one of my biggest questions that I love to ask them is, how was the food? And they always say that it was shit. Like, they said that it was generally of that quality in most FOBs in places like Iraq and Afghanistan back in the day. Generally because resupply sometimes was difficult and the supplies would run low, and then they'd have to start rationing and whatnot, and then you would get crap like that. So if this vessel has not seen underway replenishment, which is definitely likely, they are going to be eating absolute hogwash like they're eating right now, and basically none of it. So, hopefully we'll be able to see, and also, folks, this is why it's important, the supply side of things, that they get the tenders underway out there with some food and some replenishments on board to be able to see these vessels not only are just running in terms of the gas that they need and the bombs they need to keep running, but there's enough food on board for the crew to be able to eat proper meals. Because I don't like the idea of the soldiers of the Republic and the sailors of the Republic having to eat on starving diets to be able to continue the war that we have took under our own volition for national interests.
Yeah, and also, by the way, you remember all that controversy that was happening a while ago? There was people yapping about, oh, the Department of War bought like some lobsters and stuff like that and stuff to give the soldiers right before the war started. There was a whole uproar about the U.S. buying a whole bunch of nice food to give to the soldiers. So you're telling me they went from lobster and steak to mystery meat and a couple of carrot bits. Like, I mean, we don't even know what meat that is. I'm not even really sure what that is, to be honest, looking at it. I've never seen anything quite like that shape or that color either. But they went from that to this.
Yeah, well, that's what happens if you don't have a good, consistent supply chain. Like if you have so many warships within that area, like 16 of them just around the Strait of Hormuz, and all of them have to be resupplied, and you only have 3 tenders to do it with, that's going to take a while for a resupply to come back around to one of those ships, and then they have to start rationing like that. So, hopefully we'll be able to see that the situation improves with that, and they're able to get resupplied, because it's not looking like good food. I also saw someone in the chat say, man, this is one of the best comments I've ever seen. The enforcer is wrong. I was in Iraq and the food was good unless we were at an unsupplied fob. Well, everyone I know was at an unsupplied fob, and that's why I said that, is that all of them were in places like the far reaches of Kamdesh in the mountains in Afghanistan, or they were off in the northern hinterlands of Iraq, where things were a lot more difficult to resupply from what they said, and the food was never that good. A lot of them said that the food was garbage, and so that's where I get my understanding of, is that if you're in a hard-to-reach place, or the supply lines are just overstretched, things like that start to happen, and that's just, basic logistics. We also understand that the USS Gerald R. Ford, as of today, has set a record. And the USS Gerald R. Ford, the newest carrier in our fleet, has been able to conduct a full 295-day deployment at sea as of today, marking the longest U.S. carrier deployment since 1964 in the Cold War, after a mission that has spanned the Caribbean, the Red Sea, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Originally deployed from the Naval Station Norfolk in June of 2025, the carrier was reportedly extended multiple times, supported operations tied to Venezuela and Iran, and underwent repairs in Greece after an onboard laundry fire. The ship is now said to be closing in on the longest carrier deployment since 1964. I gotta tell you all that is one hell of a deployment right there. And I would hope that once the George H.W. Bush makes it into the theater, that we are able to withdraw this aircraft carrier and bring it back to the United States. Because if we're saying that the food is crummy right now on the Tripoli, I'd assume that the food's probably crummy on the Ford, maybe. Might not be, because generally carrier strike groups are prioritized for the logistics side of things, and food always comes with the tenders for the most part. But outside of that, these guys have been out there at sea longer than most aircraft carriers have been ever since 1964. And one thing that I gotta I just saw that chat that you just made in the comments, man.
You see the like. I'm kind of like halfway joking here. I'm not sure. Like, I don't think they're doing this intentionally, by the way, with the food shortage. But I mean, you know how like those sickos out there. Like, there's sickos, by the way, and I heard about this happening before. The people that do like these illegal dog fights and stuff like that, they'll like intentionally starve dogs, which is abhorrent, by the way, terrible stuff. But they'll starve the dogs to make them fight harder. It's like, I mean, they're obviously not doing this intentionally to the soldiers, but I'm like, those poor Marines out here, it's like they're being expected to get ready to go into possibly a fight or a raid of an island or something, and they're not getting good food. So that might make them extra angry.
That might make them pretty angry, maybe. Man, like the Marines on board are like, man, I kill for a good meal. It's like, oh, you kill, you say? That's great. You're going to the beaches. It's like, well, I mean, they're going to get the chance, I guess. But outside of that, The Gerald R. Ford needs to come home, folks, because let me put this into perspective. Most of the enlisted sailors on board this ship most likely signed a 4-year contract for their first starting contract in the Navy. This deployment has lasted almost a full quarter of their 4-year contract. And that's not including basic and whatnot, which would take, and also job training and everything else, which would also take up a significant amount of time of their contract. So if they got their training, if they went to basic in the Navy, and then they went through their job training, and then they went on to this deployment, almost 50%, an entire half of their 4-year enlistment contract has elapsed, and this carrier is still at sea at this moment, and that should give you all an idea of how long this deployment's been. I'd hope that they'd be able to return home, because a lot of these sailors have families that they want to see and that they want to return to, and I would hope that we would keep that in mind when conducting our rotations of our carriers overseas, instead of seeing that these guys are out there for an entire year, possibly, and then return almost 350 to 360 days into a deployment, which I think would be getting to the point of being a little absurd as far as our concern and care of the soldiers on board the carrier, or more so sailors, correction. But moving us on out of that, we have also been able to hear in other terms that the United States of America has finally ceded its last base in Syria to the Syrian interim government today, and these pictures were actually showing the convoy of the remaining U.S. forces, the very last that were left in Syria, leaving the country. From what we now know, the entirety of Syria falls under the direct control, or at least the assumed direct control, of the Syrian interim government, with absolutely no U.S. forces present on the ground anywhere within the region, including the Tuapse garrison and all of the other garrisons that we had within the formerly SDF-controlled territory. This is, of course, going to bring up some questions as to whether or not ISIS is going to reemerge within the area, considering that thousands of them were released by the Jelani regime's armed forces in their march northwards into SDF territory, but we'll generally have to wait and see what happens with that. Hopefully things don't turn out too badly. Moving us on out of that, though, we also were able to hear that according to the President of the United States today, Israel and Lebanon were able to create a ceasefire. I just had an excellent conversation with the highly respected President Joseph Aoun of Lebanon and Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu of Israel. These two leaders have agreed that in order to achieve peace between their countries, they will formally begin a 10-day ceasefire at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday. The two countries met the first time in 34 years here in Washington, D.C. with our great Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. I've directed Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Rubio, together with the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, to work with Israel and Lebanon to achieve a lasting peace. It's been my honor to solve 9 wars across the world, and this will be my 10th. So let's get it done. The President of the United States. An additional statement was also made later on the day that stated as follows: I hope Hezbollah acts nicely and well during this important period of time. It will be an great moment for them if they do. No more killing. Must finally have peace. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President of the United States. From what we understand, go ahead.
Is this suggesting that Lebanon's government somehow has control over Hezbollah's actions?
Apparently.
That's a weird thing. I thought Hezbollah was operating independently of the government inside of Lebanon, and I didn't know they had any connection.
Well, I believe, Maddie, that according to the Lebanese government's constitution under Titar 2719, woe be the son of a bitch that mess with me. Like they asked to go and get beat,
Damn.
and we're gonna run the beat. But anyways, outside of that, Joe, like we also were able to see that apparently some Hezbollah members were celebrating the announcement of the ceasefire after it was announced, of course.
Holy shit, was that an RPG?
Yeah, that was an RPG.
What the? What kind of celebration? They're firing off RPG or celebration. That's crazy. That's going to come down somewhere.
Also, this guy's firing a belt-fed machine gun. It looks like an RPD, maybe.
That's insane. I'm trying to get over the RPG that's going to clearly go on an arc and come down on somebody. Watch that be the thing that ends the ceasefire. The rogue RPG going over probably toward Israel.
Man, when I saw that RPG fire earlier today, man, I thought of that Spider-Man meme where it was like Spider-Man's grandmom, like, you know, praying on the side of her bed, and then like the back of the room blew up behind her. Remember that?
I think so.
Let's see. Let me pull it up. Spider-Man explosion meme. Yeah, this one. Hold up. Let me get this on screen for y'all. This one right here. You know this one, right?
Oh yeah. I know that one.
Bro, that's what I was thinking of. Like somewhere out there in Lebanon, somewhere, someone just had an RPG go off in their backyard. But to round out the rest of the clip. This is
Man,
clearly
nothing says quite peaceful like a gunfire celebration with RPGs being fired at random. Nothing says peace quite like that.
nothing ever says a well-organized and disciplined fighting force like a whole bunch of fools getting in the middle of the block and busting out all the weaponry they got. We also got to see that before the ceasefire went into effect, Hezbollah tried to fire every last rocket that they had into Israel and did actually cause some physical damage as a result, like this that you're seeing right here.
And they got this off right before the ceasefire went into effect?
Right before. It was like 30 minutes, apparently, before it went into effect. And we also get to see the Iron Dome at work as well, trying to shoot down a decent amount of the incoming Qassam rockets as well. Oh.
Well, then. Excuse me, sir. Can I make a humble prediction?
Yeah, go ahead.
This ceasefire ain't gonna last.
I have a feeling that it won't. But who the hell are we to rain on the parade, folks? It's not like this has been tried 3 times in the past 3 years and it's failed every time. This time, it'll surely prevail. It's not like the current president of the United States did this last year around the same time between the two groups, and he stated that it would be peace in the Middle East forever, and then the war broke out again between the two of them. It's not like that happened. So clearly, everybody, obviously, everything's going to end up fine this time. Peace in the Middle East has finally been achieved. It's not going to be achieved. This is going to collapse, folks. The last president couldn't achieve peace in the Middle East between these two groups. The current president couldn't once already. So we already have... Oh, actually, no, come to think of it. Hold up, let me think here. Okay, so wait a minute. So in 2023, the whole thing broke out. And then in 2024... Israel killed Nasrallah, and then we got the first ceasefire between them. Then in 2025, that ceasefire was broken because of the 12-day war, and they both started shooting at each other again. And then Midnight Hammer happened, and then another ceasefire was created by the current president to end the fighting between the two of them. And then the United States attacked Iran here in late February of this year, starting up the whole thing all over again. And then Hezbollah started shooting rockets at Israel. And now this time around, a ceasefire has been made, but this one, folks, is obviously going to hold. Unlike the others that completely failed, this one will work. But moving us on from that, we have also been able to see that outside of the region, there's been some very interesting developments, and I mean truly interesting developments. It's time to go to the United States of America and the Americas at large. An MQ-4 Triton was conducting some recon flights today around Cuba. This is in the midst of the word that we've been able to hear, or at least have emerged, that the United States is apparently eyeing some sort of a possible military operation against the island of Cuba here within the near future. But outside of that, though, before we get on further into this news, we actually have a poll right now on some news that I covered a little while ago, as we did get to hear that apparently the Europeans only have about 6 weeks of jet fuel left. Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so the analysts are saying, they're saying once again that a crisis is on the horizon. I'm sorry for bringing the negative news. I wish we had something positive to report, but unfortunately, it's another sort of a downtrodden story to a degree. We are hearing that Europe apparently only has about 6 weeks of jet fuel left, and they're warning of a huge crisis. So what are your thoughts? 43% said Europe will find a fix soon, while 37% said Europe will fall into a crisis, and 13% said I'm really 50-50 on this one. And if what they're saying is true, then I think Europe is going to be having a lot less air travel happening very, very soon in the future. But here's my question, though. If Europe's having a fuel shortage of jet fuel, then how is the U.S. going to keep fueling our airlifts into the Middle East? Because some of these things are stopping over in Europe, and they're refueling at some of our bases in Europe, obviously, some of these U.S. cargo aircraft. So how is that going to work if Europe's out of jet fuel? That might end up hampering the U.S. military effort unless we have our own supply system for fuel or something like that. But Enforcer, what say you?
Oh, I'd say that they're probably going to be up the creek without a paddle. The situation with the Strait of Hormuz is probably not going to be resolved here anytime soon, so they're probably just going to run out of fuel and have to figure that out from there. So I hope that does address that well. And moving us on down into Cuba again, this was about to be a real fun one. This was going to be great, folks. It looks like the Triton has disappeared off of flight radar. Actually, No, it hasn't. It's now flying back to Jacksonville, where it came from. So it looks like our reconnaissance of Cuba today is over, at least for the moment. However, the Cubans have shown that they are going to put their best foot forward. And we do understand that this picture is giving us an idea of the military and defensive capabilities of the communist Cubans.
Bro, is that the oxen, like Ollie oxen free that they talk about in those comic books?
Yes, my boy, this is that Ollie oxen-free, gush gun attached on trailer gun. It's truly an innovation of Cuba's military prowess and might. Let's take a look. I wish we had a video that didn't have this watermark on it, because then we could actually show it to y'all. So I just got to kind of show y'all the clips, but, well, more so like frames of the video. But here we can see, folks, the true strength of the Cuban military. This one man here with a rope attached to the harness on these oxen as he attempts to yank them down the road. And our next exhibit here, we can see that he has made some forward progress and has moved the oxen down the road, as more Cubans here on the left prepare to start firing their gats into the air with wild abandon. In our next frame, we can see the weapons and firepower of the Cuban armed forces, which appears to be a ZSU-23-2 mounted onto a wooden trailer with car tires on it that's pulled by 2 oxen and 1 well-determined man.
That's you know what's funny about this is those 2 oxen there aren't just any oxen. These are the long line of royal descendant oxen from Fidel Castro's regime. These are favorite oxen. So don't disrespect them. As you can see, they're looking at the camera. They're trying to make sure that they're posing well, because you can't be a royal oxen and not have a good pose. Also, they don't appear to be wanting to cooperate very much. It looks like they guys pulling pretty hard on that rope, and I don't think they're moving.
I think these might be ox scripts. Get it? It's like conscripts.
Man, he's as peaceful as a bull.
In our next frame here, we can see that the oxen have started to make distance with the gun. And in our next frame, we can finally see that the gun has been set up. Oxen still attached. Horse tack is attached, as the Cubans begin firing into the air with wild abandon. They fire for some time. I wish I could get a clip of y'all, so that, a clip of this so that we can hear it. Oh, there we are. And we can see that they fired the gush gun on the mule wagon.
With all 3 of their guys, or all 4 of them, actually, I'm seeing double. There's 4 guys right there. They're going to take the U.S. on. You got to watch out for these Fidel Castro type dudes right here. They're going to go after the United States. We're in trouble, boys. We're in trouble.
It appears, Matthew, though, that the firepower was so immense that even the brave Cuban cameraman shuddered in fear of the gush gun. And apparently, on the right side here, next to the gush gun, we can see what appears to be a turkey shoot or a pigeon shoot of some sort that's also going on as these guys fire into the air.
Bro, they spooked the ox. They spooked the ox. Did you see the trailer bouncing around?
Oh, hold on. Oh, dude, I see it. Oh, look at that. Look at that, folks. Like, the oxen are getting startled.
Man, that's a huge flaw with the oxen system. The oxes are over there like jumping around like jumping beans. That's not going to work.
Oh, my Lord. I didn't notice that the first go around. But they're actually about to up in that cart and probably flip it with the gunner on it. Oh, my God. Oh, Lord.
It turns out that the Cubans have learned that animals don't like loud noises and huge shock waves right next to their ears. They really don't like that, and they're probably not going to cooperate.
The next time the oxen are brought to be attached to this cart, they're going to be like, hell no, man. They're going to be resisting the whole time. Oh, man.
Oh.
You know, folks, I actually got to hear today that the Cubans also did an armor demonstration of their limited number of main battle tanks that they have on the field. And I've also been able to hear that they have some real heifers in those forces as well. Man, did you want to see one of the pictures I got out today out of that Cuban armored exercise that they had?
Yeah, let's see this. I'm sure this is beautiful. This is better than Venezuela. Oh, damn. Is that it right? This is a nice hardware for these oxen. They've really upgraded their military infrastructure.
Man, truly. I mean, it's a massive innovation. This is hand-carved. Like this, as opposed to chop blocks that they normally use. I mean, this is a huge improvement. Look, these guys have caps on, basically.
That's real nice. They look like they're working the drive-through window. Those fellows right there with that hat on. This is worse than Venezuela, though. I thought Venezuela was bad. Like when we saw them trying to flex their like really puny muscles of their military. I mean, Cuba literally has nothing. They're literally working with animals for the most part, and also those poor oxen are going to be deaf after they get done with that like artillery fire going off behind their head. I'm sorry for laughing, by the way. Like I love animals. I don't want to see animals get hurt, but the stupidity is just like it's laughable. The stupidity of what's going on in Cuba right now. They have no chance, but I'm still not wise to go down to Cuba and start a war right now with everything else going on. But I mean, Cuba, their military is not fit for anything.
No, I think this proved that today. And on top of that, I have to say this, folks, with a military like that, do we really need to do anything to Cuba? Because do they really pose a threat to the United States? I mean, what are they going to do? Conduct an oxen invasion of Florida? They're not going to do anything. And so far, we don't really know of the Chinese or really anyone else really using Cuba to any sort of potential beyond a listening post. And, you know, any spy ship could do that and just pull up near our shore and basically do the same thing the listening posts are doing in Cuba. So what is really the point of dealing with the Cubans, considering that their military is that bad off? I mean, it's a military that's so bad off, there's really no way to even make a strategic justification that they are a threat, because their military is so, it's literally non-existent to the point they couldn't pose a threat. So that'd be my 2 cents on it. I don't know why we're still trying to eye some sort of a military operation on Cuba, because also the other thing is, folks, is that if we invade Cuba and we win, then what do we do? And nobody's thinking about that one, because at that point, technically the island's under a U.S. military occupation, and all of the humanitarian disasters that have permeated in Cuba for decades are now our problem. So then we have to start actively fixing them. Because we're now the occupation force in the country. That's going to cost a great deal of money and a great deal of resources at a time in which we might not have a great deal of money and resources to be able to throw that way. And I would love to see that the Cuban people's lot was improved. I just don't think that the time is right now, in the midst of our war with Iran and a possible war with Russia and a possible war with China that's all coming around the corner. I feel like Cuba is like the smallest fry thing that we could generally deal with right now. We have better things to do. But anyways, it is time for us to move on out of Cuba and on up to the Norfolk shipyard, as unfortunately the Dwight D. Eisenhower apparently had a small fire on board today, and it appears that post was unfortunately deleted. We also get to hear from the U.S. government that they're apparently now investigating the missing scientists, as about 10 research scientists working under nuclear rocket and defense research have died or went missing under suspicious circumstances here over this past year, which is starting to lead many to believe that there might be foul play involved by some foreign actor that is trying to assassinate top scientists here within the United States of America to slow technological development here within the States. We'll have to see if they find anything that would show that that may be happening. Moving us on out of that, though, we are now going to be moving on into Europa and the war in Ukraine. Moving us on down into Marseille in France, we were able to hear that the French have finally released the tanker the Denia, which was generally seized by the French some time ago, or more so detained in late March. The French authorities allowed the vessel to leave the port of Marseille after accusing the crew of using a false flag. In French court, the ship's owner failed to prove the right to sail under the Mozambique flag, which resulted in a fine. The detention was first announced on the 20th of March by Emmanuel Macron, the president of the French Republic, describing such vessels as war profiteers and pledging to crack down on their activities, which the French really do have an ability to do, actually. We have also been able to hear that the Netherlands is apparently going to be providing their minesweepers to Ukraine. I believe about 3 of them or so, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow, does that mean that Ukraine's going to have more minesweepers than the United States?
Yes.
Oh wow, that's
Yeah.
crazy work right there. Also, it's interesting. That's you said this is Spain doing those?
The Netherlands, actually.
Oh, the Netherlands. Okay, for a minute there, I got a little familiar. You look like the Spanish fellow there for a minute. The fellow in Spain, but I got confused. Never mind.
Man, right now in this picture, though, Zelensky's looking out that window. He's going, man, you could fling so many drones through a window of that size. It's like that needs to be shrunk down to be a little smaller. But moving us on out of those pictures and that nice news coming out of the Netherlands today, we have also been able to see that things in Russia are going quite interestingly. Apparently, the Russians are trying to create some sort of a nuclear anti-satellite capability in orbit, according to the United States.
Man, I think the conspiracy theorists are kind of going like, what is it, 5-0 at this point? Like, for once, the conspiracy theories are actually coming true. Like, this is the EMP that everybody's been warning about, like all the conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, it is actually. But the Russians have brought this one up a good while ago. Remember, like a year and then 2 years ago, they've kind of been bringing this up for years. I don't really know if they're ever going to actually follow through on this, folks, because I remember we were talking about this last year, and I was like, that would be kind of dumb for them to blow up a nuclear weapon basically in space, because that would fry every satellite up there, including ones that aren't military related, and all of the Russian ones as well. So it's basically wiping everything out that is operational right now in orbit. But apparently they're still exploring it, according to the Kyiv Post, so that way they could try and disrupt global communications, GPS, and power systems.
Yeah, I mean, this right here, apparently the source of the story is coming from someone that's in the U.S. military. That's apparently the source of the information. So it's not just, mainstream speculating about it. This is a threat or something that's being propagated by people in our military. So I would take it seriously. It sounds like something they could be planning to do, but it sounds like it's a capability that Russia might deploy in the future. It's not like things lurking in orbit right now, or at least we don't think it is, according to what we've heard. But it's something that Russia is actively planning and possibly preparing to deploy into orbit. And if they do that, by the way, that's violating all kinds of treaties. Like Russia's actually a signatory to one of the space treaties that pretty much prohibits that. And if they do it, they're violating it directly, which can be construed as an act of war in itself.
I think it's the Outer Space Treaty or something along those lines, which technically makes it illegal to weaponize any sort of satellites or systems in space. So generally that would be a violation of that, and that would allow for everyone to start weaponizing space. But generally, a lot of countries right now, like China and Russia, are using as their defense, well, we're weaponizing space because the U.S. is building the Golden Dome system, or is planning to build it in space. So for that reason, we also get to weaponize space as well now. And that's why a lot of them are generally making, generally using as their defense for these sorts of weapons, which I kind of got to say, it's like, it was kind of dumb to announce we're going to create a space-based weapon system. It's like, well, that kind of breaks the Outer Space Treaty in that regard, and then that lets everyone kind of open up the floodgates and try and beat us to the punch. That wasn't really a smart thing to say. But anyways, moving us on from that, before someone who knows way better than us, it tells us that we're wrong on that one. But moving on from that, we are moving on down to the Black Sea, as the Russians did report an attack on an oil tanker in their waters, but then they never stated who it was, where it was, or anything else, so we don't know if that's true. But we do know what is true. Down in Tuapse, it appears that something quite tremendous has happened. Oh,
it looks like a trouble.
Do you see that?
It looks a little bit slick.
That's no slick, that's a cloud. A 147-kilometer-long cloud. If we took that and flipped it up the coastline, this thing would reach all the way to the port of Novorossiysk, which is about 120 miles away, just about. So quite the distance of a smoke cloud right there, giving you a little bit of an idea of the damage. Now let's show you all the damage up close. Here's all the clips we have of the fires in Tuapse.
Блять, там походу МПЗ въебали.
That's a beautiful beach out there, though. That's pretty nice.
The Black Sea has always been known for its nice beaches, and also its wonderful fires. I mean, the fires are truly world-renowned. Nothing ever beats them. And it is quite nice down there, actually. I mean, I won't lie, but that fire is kind of detracting from the natural beauty of everything, Here's another picture of the fire in Tuapse at the refinery. Quite a large one. A very large one, actually. Also, we were able to see a little bit more of it right here. Take a look at this.
Oh, wow.
Oh!
Looks like scorched earth.
I gotta tell you, fires like that, they happen about once every week, but they're always impressive. Just look at that fire roar. And someone said, that stupid portrait mode. I honestly don't like portrait mode either, but it is what it is. We just have to make do with what we got. Oh, and look at that.
I think Tuapse is jacked up.
Man, Tuapse is gotten a little tuapped. Like it's not doing too well. That fire looks quite large. and quite toxic. Yeah, I tell you, folks, those Russians are kind of getting smoked out there a little. Let's look at this one other clip here. Oh, Briaga. Like, that's pretty nasty looking. The hit at Tuapse was quite significant. From what we understand, it knocked out the oil loading port and the refinery generally in one fell swoop, as they're all interconnected for the larger part. And for that reason, the port of Tuapse has been knocked out of operation again. And we don't know how long it's going to be knocked out this time around, but it's probably going to be a good hot minute, which we're always happy to hear. Moving us on out of that, though, a lot of people are also hearing that news about those scientists who have been dying in somewhat concerning numbers here within the United States. And a lot of people are wondering, what's up with that? And Matthew, what are people thinking about that?
Okay, so this has been circulating around for quite some time, but we largely haven't given it too much attention here on the stream. In fact, I think we've only mentioned it in passing previously, but it's gotten a lot more attention now because the U.S. president weighed in directly on it today and acknowledged that this is something that the U.S. is actively investigating and that they had briefings on it today. So it's no longer just some random headline or conspiracy theory. It's apparently something so concerning that federal authorities are launching an official probe and investigation into it, which is quite concerning to say the least, because over the past year, reports claim that 10 plus top research scientists here in the United States that are working on highly secretive nuclear, rocket, and defense research. 5 of them have died, and the other 5 went missing under very suspicious circumstances. And also, some of them had connections to UFO research in the government. I mean, they were involved in some stuff that was at very top levels, and all of a sudden, they're dying left and right. They're also, some of them, I think, might have gotten possibly murdered, I think. And then some of them just went missing, and nobody's sure where they went. And these are top people. I think one of the guys was a pretty high-level fellow in the Air Force that was out of action, I think. So pretty serious. But what do you think is going on with this, though? It looks like 32% said it sounds like a U.S. operation or a cover-up, while 36% said it sounds like foreign hybrid warfare, like maybe these might be assassinations, and 20% said it sounds like possible kidnappings, maybe by a foreign government. So right now, we don't know much of anything. All we know is, there's people going missing left and right, and there's clearly some type of connection between all these different situations because they're all involved in defense, and they're all of high level, and pretty much all of them have classified security clearances. So I would say, to me, I really don't know what to say about this. It could be kidnappings, possibly. It could be maybe China has operatives in our country, or maybe Iran does, and they're kidnapping people and maybe trying to exfiltrate them to Mexico to take them back to their home country, possibly. That could be it. Or it could be that maybe a country is taking revenge on the United States, and they're trying to take out our top, knowledge base, basically, of nuclear and all these other things to simply harm U.S. national security. It could be that as well. Or they could be trying to get secrets out of them. But it's very concerning, and I'll be very curious to see what the U.S. says comes out of this. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that, in my opinion, I would have to be a little bit undecided. It might just be, and this is a low chance, but it still might be the case, that it might just be that a lot of these people are just dropping dead or going missing for some reason or another, and for some reason we're just paying attention to this now, and it might have always been like this. It's just that we never really had the ability to kind of focus on it in the prior instances when this happened. I'm not really sure, because this only came upon our radar recently. I don't know if this is kind of a common occurrence for top scientists, because it's not like we only have 100 of them. I mean, there's tens of thousands of them across the United States, so, about 10 of them going missing over a year, it's not that bad of a number, really. On the other hand, however, it could be some form of foreign hybrid warfare. Maybe there's some foreign country trying to take out top scientists in key research fields. But also on top of that, if they're trying to do that, well, they're going to be conducting a very passive amount of damage, because it's not like we have one scientist in one lab on one project. We usually have teams of scientists in one lab on one project, meaning that one of them goes missing. That's unfortunate, but the work will still continue. You never have just one designer that makes the F-35 in its entirety. There's hundreds of scientists, designers, engineers, and everything else in between that are making that weapon system come into being, or any other technology for that matter. But maybe they're trying that and it's just very slow progress or slow work. Maybe they're being kidnapped, by other groups like the cartel or whatnot for some reason. I don't really know, to be entirely honest with y'all, but I'd have to largely say that I'm in the unknown camp, because I just wouldn't have a clue. because it might be normal. It might be a normal occurrence, and we're just starting to pay attention to it, or it might not be. Because I'll tell you all this, though. I'll tell you all this, folks. This is why I'm saying this, is that a lot of people don't really pay attention to American railroads, and I don't mean to attach this to the railroads, but just something I've seen there is that derailments happen in the United States all the time. I mean, so many times they don't make the news. But for some reason, at some point a couple of years back, it was like 2024, the mainstream news started picking up on derailments in this country and just started reporting all of them for like a month or two. And it gave a lot of people in the public this idea that U.S. railway infrastructure was crumbling immediately in 2024 for no reason at all, just because it was being covered for once. And derailments were happening all the time before then and after then, but for some reason, because they covered it then, everyone thought that, you know, derailments were either foreign espionage, they were sabotage, or infrastructure was crumbling, and that just wasn't the case. It's just that a spotlight was finally put on it for once, for people to see kind of what goes on in the railroading world, and then everyone lost their minds, just getting a little glimpse of that reality. And that might be a similar case with this. Because, you know, who knows, like, you know, we might see that a lot of this news and attention disappears, and then if you're really paying attention, a couple of more scientists could go missing or die after this, and then it just ends up being a normal trend or an occurrence.
I don't know. These are really weird because, like, for example, one of the most prominent people that has gone missing, according to the reports I've read, was apparently a retired Air Force Major General who oversaw one of the most advanced and highly classified research programs out there. He just vanished from his home in Albuquerque, and his wife was just gone for an hour, according to the report. And then when she came back, he was gone, and he hasn't been seen since. And, you know, he left his phone behind, and his wallet and his revolver were missing when this guy was discovered to be missing. So, I mean, he was a top level fella, and this is not just one of them. I mean, that was one Air Force Major General that went missing, but there's also other people, scientists in the nuclear field, in the defense research field. And I mean, some people have argued that maybe some of them might have been old and possibly senile, but not all of them were. And it's arguable if any of them were. Some people said, like, for example, the Air Force Major General would still be the most intelligent guy in the room if he were to show up, even though he was in an older age. They said he was in a perfectly good state of mind. So to me, it seems odd. Like, it seems really strange to me. But it's like, with all these things happening left and right, it's like, do these people not have defense? It's like, do they not have, like, firearms for defense? It's like, how are these people just getting taken out? Like, some of them left and right. It's like some of these people are missing, and some of them are, you know, dead, and some of them are. So I don't know. It seems really strange to me.
Yeah, it does seem pretty strange. I mean, it is somewhat odd. But I think we just need to pay more attention to this over some time. Maybe even start digging through news and information from before this time and see if these sorts of deaths or disappearances were common back then. And it's just that they didn't really get a lot of attention, and therefore they weren't spun into some sort of a larger story or a theory. Because, you know, that's definitely the case. Because I see some people saying, like, I saw someone say, well, yeah, you know, a train derailment's bad. Like, and I don't mean to, like, bring this back up again, but this is just to kind of bring up that some things could get overblown for no reason, is that some people are, well, you know, these people are working with quantum computing and whatnot, but a railway engineer is running a train, and the head units are worth about 30 million each, and then the cargo that that train is carrying on a full train load could be up to about $5 to $7 million each. So if a train derailment happens, you're speaking of tens of millions of dollars in damage to the locomotives and the cargo alone. And that's pretty big when you think about it, that's in the hands of, you know, one engineer and one brakeman is tens of millions of dollars in value in assets and cargo. So, you know, like, people don't really, you know, like, when people always try and downplay stuff and say something's really big, but I just don't know, because we just don't have enough information beforehand if these sorts of disappearances or deaths were common at this rate in that number for this group of people in society. So, you know, I think generally, folks, that's why I'm saying I'm uncertain on this, because if we have a running number or a figure for that, and it was wildly low and then it jumped for some reason last year, then something's definitely amiss. But if it was fairly similar in number the year before that, and then it was fairly similar this year, then that just means that that's just normal attrition, if we wanted to call it that. These people go missing and die about that rate all the time normally, so it might not be anything up with it.
But, you know, there was that professor, I can't remember which university he was from, but he was working on nuclear fusion. And I think if I have the story correct and I remember it properly, he showed up to his apartment, he got popped by somebody, and then they found him later dead in his apartment. Like, to me, that seems really, like, that doesn't seem random to me. It's like, and even if it was like a home invasion or something like that, it's like typically like home invasions, the people aren't going there to go pop somebody. They're trying to go steal something and get out without being caught, for the most part. So, the fact that he got popped and he happened to be a top nuclear fusion research scientist in the United States, considered the most preeminent, and he got popped in his apartment. I'm like, to me, that rings really weird.
Well, it could just be some deranged lunatic like a lone operator. Because when you think about it, like a lot of people used to think that a certain person, Ted Kaczynski, which some people would know as like the Unabomber, a lot of people used to think that that was some sort of a terrorist cell in the country or a terrorist group. That's what the FBI thought for years, because they were like, this guy, this group, whoever it is, they keep sending these improvised explosives to specific locations nationwide with something a bit of a pattern. This definitely has to be a group. And then it turned out to just be one guy in some tiny cabin off in the middle of nowhere who was a nut. Maybe there's some nut in the United States, like a serial killer or something like that, that's going around and taking these people out. I mean, really, at that point, it could be anybody. It could just be any sort of an instance of crime if these people do have foul play involved in all of their disappearances and death. It could be a foreign actor. It could be some lone person in the United States who's a serial killer or a maniac. It could be anything at that point.
Could be. Well, I mean, you got to admit, though. I mean, that's pretty insane that these people are going missing left and right. I've seen everything. People. I've seen people say that maybe the U.S. government is like shuttling these people into like a secret research program, and they're taking their identities off the public market, so that way nobody knows where they went and stuff like that. Like they're working on like a Manhattan Project or something. But the problem is, you have to be alive to work on the research program. You can't be dead in your apartment and be taken to the research program. It doesn't work like that. So, when there's like, strange murders happening and death, I mean, I don't think that's the case. Maybe some of the people that went missing, possibly, but I would highly doubt that. I would think there might be some foul play involved.
Maybe. We'll generally have to see if they come up with anything here in the future. But moving us on out of that, and on into the rest of the news that we have, we were also able to hear some developments out of the war in Ukraine. I have to tell you in advance, folks, sadly we don't have a speech from Zelensky tonight, but we do have something else. We were able to hear that Zelensky did request today the launch of a tribunal for Russia's aggression against Ukraine to hold Russian war criminals legally accountable, and he stated that this is necessary, just as it was necessary after the Second World War, referencing the Nuremberg trials for the Nazi war criminals at the end of the Second World War in 1945. We also were able to hear that the Ukrainians did hit a substation in Belgorod, which is the Yuzhnaya substation, and we can see that it was burning after the hit right there in that picture. Additionally, we've also gotten further news out of the Donetsk area that it appears that the Russians might be preparing for a new offensive, as the Russians are now deploying 20,000 reservists to eastern Ukraine for a new offensive. The goal is to capture the entirety of the Donetsk region by September, according to Ukrainian intelligence. Well, that's good on them. It's only taken them 3 years to make it to where they are right now. I'm sure that with the end of September coming around and just 20,000 more troops, they'll be able to take the whole of Donetsk, because that clearly makes a whole lot of sense. We also heard that the Azov Corps was also conducting long-range strikes in Donetsk city, funnily enough, at the same time today, in this clip right here. There it is. Gorodonetska. Oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. The major roadways going out to Donetska, Gorodoblet. And all the supply nodes. Oh, oh, look, the Ukrainians are literally just flying through the city.
A little bit bouncy.
It's a little windy. Hero of the Soviet Union statue, and there's the Donetsk Stadium right there. They're just going to fly on over that as well. Wow, look at that.
Oh, dang. Look at that. They got that's actually like a legit stadium there. Look at that. They got Donetsk written on the seats.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, whoa. Yikes.
So crazily enough, man, speaking of that stadium, a lot of people don't know about it. It was literally built and finished, I think, just a couple of months before the area was taken by the Russians in the quote-unquote separatist movement of 2014. Like, it was just completed in time for that. So it was brand new. And what's funny about that is that the Ukrainians built this brand new stadium in the middle of Donetsk city, while the Russians were claiming that the Ukrainians were genociding ethnic Russians in the Donetsk region. It's like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because if they were doing something like that, it's like, why in the world would they waste all of the money building a brand new, super nice football stadium for the public to enjoy in that area? It seems kind of counterintuitive, you know?
Yeah, it seems like more Russian lies, more Ruski blit lies, blit.
Hey, it looks like they're paying for those dearly now by these FPV drones, blit. Oh, it took the. Oh, look, a little Russian unit right there, a cooked out vehicle. Oh! Dang, I gotta tell you, no one's safe in Donetsk anymore, or at least the Russian army isn't.
And the Russians are just going down the main roads and highways with their supply trucks. They're not even like trying to really hide them or anything.
Yeah, because they think they're safe back here. That's going to be changing soon, because they're certainly not safe back here anymore.
That's really wild. The Russians have like a full-on military infrastructure going on here in Donetsk. Like it is nonstop.
Yeah, it's a significant supply hub for the entirety of this front. I think that several combined arms armies actually use Donetsk City as a general staging and logistics hub for their forces. You can definitely see that with the volume of traffic that they have here on the highways and how much the first Azov was able to hit over really just a course of about 2 days. Outside of Donetsk City, we also were able to see that further on up and inside of the location unknowns, we have the Russian casualty report. And ole mole, one Bobcat.
Oh, look at that. Oh, look, I got the jittering Bobcat over there. Look at that. I got one right there, one from that. Look at that. Look at that Bobcat. It's jittering with excitement. It's ready to start getting at that dirt. I tell you, look at that thing. Look at it. But tell us more.
Man, I gotta say, it's beautiful. And according to the records, Misty used to say that losses in all major categories, something for everyone, including for Matt, which is good to hear. And over the past 24 hours, 1,100 Russian soldiers were iced, wounded, and killed. And we also saw 1 EPC, 208 supply trucks, 2 main battle tanks, 43 artillery pieces, 1,357 drones, 2 MLRSs, 20 cruise missiles, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, and 1 Bobcat skid steer. What a great day. What a wonderful day. It's a good one. Moving us on from that and on up into the area of Luhansk, the Ukrainian armed forces also conducted attacks with FP2 drones on Russian fuel trains, including this one right here, which seems to have been blocked off and apportioned for unloading. So y'all see that right there? How it's 2, 2, 2, and 1? And it's on the specific siding right here. That's what's called in the railroading world, folks, spotting the rail cars, because there's exact spots that you're supposed to drop them off at. And this shows that a freight train or a locomotive had come through would consist of these cars and drop them off at a specific spacing so that way they could be accessed by the Russian army and unloaded so that way they could refuel their forces on the front. Looks like the Ukrainians are going to be stopping that refueling right here by blowing up some of the fuel tanks. Oh, bleh.
Dang.
Oh, and they went for another bleh. Oh, bleh. Oh, now they're going to go for the next one. Oh,
The Ukrainians don't like train cars.
Man, the Ukrainians love trains. What are you talking about? They run all of their military logistics on the railroad as well.
They just don't like Ruski train cars. Suka bliat.
I don't like them either. I think they're hideous. So generally, I'm perfectly fine with those railroad losses. I'll be honest with y'all, folks. I only have a couple of trains that I actually like in the world: Japanese ones, German ones, British ones, American, Canadian, and Mexican ones, and that's about it. Everyone else, they're all right or they're not great at all. But those are the primo spots for trains, best trains out there. But anyways, moving on from that, it is time for us to get on down and into the area of Donetsk, as we were able to see that the Ukrainians were also continuing to hit those surface-to-air missile defense systems and others within the region, including this Buke, which was rebuked. Oh!
Buke the
Oh
Buke.
my god. But that thing turned into a bonfire. I've never seen a Buke do that one before. That's new.
They call this a bomb fire.
Oh, that's a good one. Oh, giggity, giggity, giggity. Oh, and they got a pantsier right here. On top of the slag heap. Y'all know some slag. Well, I mean, like.
Well.
Ah, there it is. A Pantsir S1. Look, they're going to show you a little demonstration of how these things work. They don't really work like that, actually. They just kind of sit in place until they get blown up. I gotta tell you, folks, the neighborhood that we grew up in was so rough, there was a slag heap there, too, but it wasn't made out of, like, industrial slag, I'll tell you that. Oh, man, I'm telling you. But it is. Oh, man, my neighborhood was rough. Real rough. Oh, man, back in the day.
Man, look, it's the Duckmobile. Look, they're gonna hit the thing. Look at that.
Yeah, it's called House.
Man, look at this duck. Oh, there it went.
Oh, look at that.
They ducked it up.
Oh man, I gotta tell you, my neighborhood was so rough growing up that I had to budget for hold-up money. Oh man, I'm telling you. And we see here that they're now getting a very rare Tunguska. A 2S6 is what this thing technically is. And they got it. Now they're going to go for a Buick M1. This is the one that we actually saw at the very beginning of the video. These things are hideous.
Very bulbous.
Bruh, that thing has got, what is it, Matthew? It's like a hydrocephalus or something like that?
Man, it's got a snoot.
Man, that thing's able to smell for some distance, I would assume. But they're about to make it smell this high explosive here. Oh!
Oh man, they dove when they should have ducked.
Man, they bobbed instead of weaving. There it goes. It's cooking. Oh my god, bleh.
They crawled when they couldn't even walk.
Oh my god, it's blowing up! Oh man. But anyway, so you see it cooking down there. Look at it. Little Reese's pieces now, a little scattered across the field. Oh my god, wow, the middle of that thing was gone. Now it appears that they're hitting some sort of a fuel infrastructure here in this clip. Don't know exactly where. It looks like it's in Crimea, actually. It said it in the description down there. Oh!
Oh wow, that thing got finished off.
This is apparently in Glubokki in Crimea, from what I can tell. Well, unfortunately, I wouldn't know exactly where that one is. You know, they always tell you don't leave the gas on when you leave home. In Russia, they have a fairy tale now that it doesn't matter whether you leave the gas on or off, the Ukrainians will turn it on for you. It also appears they hit another oil infrastructure inside of Crimea, this one in Oktyabrsky. I could actually read that one, I know where that one is. Man, it really pays to read Cyrillic, I tell you, especially in the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, it really pays to be able to read the Cyrillic.
This is in Kurultany, I believe, and Crimea as well. So most of these strikes were inside of Crimea. Here's another one in Crimea in the same town.
It's a Crimea River.
We want the Russians to really cry, Crimea River. We need more bombs. like that's what we need.
The Russians have a thing with calling things cry. They call it Krasnodar cry because they like to cry. They call it Crimea River because they like to cry. They have no cards.
I'm not here to play cards. I'm here to play chess, and my enemies are playing checkers. I beat the hell out of them.
But we have to remember that the United States is playing 5D chess, like Mr. Spock in Star Trek.
You see, how it works for them is that they take 1 step forward and 2 steps back, and then they call it a success. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any damn sense.
It's so crazy, the planning out of the United States, that nobody can understand or fathom it.
I have heard that recently the U.S. government has stated that they are taking on a religious aspect. So the Secretary of Defense came out this morning and quoted a Bible scripture that doesn't exist and is from the movie Pulp Fiction. Really something. Something incredible.
They said, I would like to quote Caesar 2512. It turns out that Caesar is not a chapter in the book. That's a big problem.
He also mispronounced the word Caesar. It's not Caesar. It's Caesar. Really kind of stupid if you ask me. Someone said, what a thing to join into. What the hell? Man, look at that. Oh.
I'll tell you, whoa, that bus survived.
Oh my god, it's a Chernobyl bus. It's one of the buses that evacuated Chernobyl. Man, the silence on that one was deafening right there. Oh man. But man,
I was giving flashbacks to Chernobyl when you did that. I was thinking about that miniseries. It sent me into a mode.
Namane, Gabarit, Moskva.
Don't do that, man. Give me flashbacks.
There's graphite on the ground. You didn't see it. You're unstable. Send him to the infirmary. Like, man, that's like funny. Oh, man. The SBS is doing hard work out there in Crimea these days, I tell you. Moving us on from that. We also got to see that the Ukrainians hit the Russian positions down in Zaporizhia with some GBU-62s. Take a little look at that. Oh.
Man, some big ones. Big ones.
Oh. Oh, goodness, that position is gone. Hey.
Man, I'll tell you what, the Ukrainians, well, I won't make that joke. I'll hold back there. I don't know if that's going to be stream appropriate. Now I have everybody talking about, you can't do that. You can't start a joking and stop. I got to.
Well, I mean, technically you can't. I mean, them's the rules, but you know, it is.
I don't want to
what it
say
is.
something that could come back and bite me in the ass. I don't want to say something like that. I don't want to have to try to play it off with that locker room talk spill. I don't want to have to play it off that locker room talk. I've never been in the locker room personally. I didn't play sports like that. I didn't do that. I never stepped foot in the locker room. If I did, it would have been kind of weird because I didn't play sports. Yeah.
Real locker room banner, you know, nothing says really masculine like being in a shower naked with a whole bunch of other guys. Like, really nothing else. But beyond that, though, it is time for us to move on out of our news, our great, wonderful news. We did so much work on it tonight. It was done so well. Many people have looked at it and gone, wow, Enforcer, you did such a good job narrating and orating that news. You're truly the best, truly the greatest. Somebody give this guy a Pulitzer. And really, honestly, I don't want a Pulitzer. I just want to put the pets on the news, I tell you. But outside of that, it is time for us to move on and into the questions. We just got to grab them by the question segment and then get on into it and take care of business. So, Matthew, I got to say before we move on, the big thanks to everyone for watching this channel. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure, a real honor and a pleasure. We've had 20,000 people here live. Wow, that's a lot of people. Really many people. The most people, the biggest amount of people in history ever seen in one place. And 125,000 people have watched this show in about 2 hours and 20 minutes. What a wonderful crowd. What a wonderful, great crowd. Incredible stuff. Wonderful energy here. We love it. We really do. But with that, it's time for us to move on to the question segment. We're going to be talking about literally anything and everything except for religion, politics, climate change, and whether the agent is relevant in modern warfare or not, which is literally everything that the real president would actually talk about. But I'm not going to talk about that at all. So, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so moving into our final question segment, getting our super chats first, then getting into our live chats and our Morse code decoders. Let's get started with our first ones. And also, by the way, I have been scanning for breaking news, and so far, it looks like there's no breaking news tonight. So we're getting a bit of a lull when it comes to, insane developments. We obviously still have a lot of big developments. I mean, today's news segment was wild to say the least, but nothing happening active. Honestly, obviously we cover news, so if we have news to cover, that's great. I'm really honestly glad that nothing too crazy is happening right now. It's more of like a slow burn. We're getting a little bit of a reprieve from anything too crazy happening, at least presently. But jumping into our first super chat here, this one is going to go to none other than Chris Fileblock. And thank you very much, Chris, for that $50 support. And we do appreciate that. He said, what is this bliat? Can you say the word or perhaps the first letter? It could be so many words.
Well, bliat. Can you say, bleh. Like we said it so many times here on this channel. And a humongous thanks to you for the support and helping this channel keep ringing. And Chris, that word in Russian, it's a flavor word. A lot like there are flavor words here in the English language. And it's commonly used in basically every sentence in Russia. So a humongous thanks to you for the support and helping this channel to keep running. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, it is time for us to move on and into the next one.
All right, so our next one here is going to go to none other than Chef Danny B. And thank you very much, Chef Danny, for that $50 support. And we do appreciate the generous support. Chef Danny said, good evening, Enforcers. Oh, good evening, LSA as well. Chef Danny here. 78 degrees here today, and tomorrow the high of 38 and snowing down by Polar, Colorado weather. In y'all's opinion, if we put boots on the ground in Iran, they would hit us hard with drones. LT, LSA. You know, the weird thing, Danny, is actually snowing here right now in Salt Lake City. Like, it was snowing all day long, and some of it actually stuck to the ground. And it was actually decently warm the days before now. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, it got freezing, and then it started snowing out of the blue. So we're having that weird weather as well. It sounds like it's moving your way tomorrow. It's probably moving out toward Colorado. So kind of interesting with that weather. I think they even closed down the skiing season early because there wasn't any snow, but then we got some today. So really, really weird. But Enforcer, what say you?
You know, it's really bizarre, folks, because I was looking at trying to go out and hiking today, and the weather forecast said that it might rain at 3. And it was like a 25% chance it was the only hour of the day that it might rain. And I was like, you know what? Something tells me that it's probably going to be a lot more than that, so I'm just going to stay inside. Turns out it's been snowing over here the whole day today. And it really didn't stick on the ground down here much, here in the city, but the mountains are once again covered in snow again in the middle of April. And I'm now on my hiking craze where I want to go hiking, and now all of the trails are going to be muddy, and they're going to be wet, and they're going to be covered in snow, and it's going to be cold, and it's like, damn, it's like, you know, that's really an unfortunate time for that to happen. But that same storm front is actually heading out your way right now, so it's going to be a very similar thing that we dealt with today over there in Colorado. So I hope you have fun with it. I mean, it was actually really nice to look at out the window, like watching all the snowfall and everything, and all of the mountains covered in snow. And I gotta also say, generally, drone warfare is something that we have an Achilles heel on at the moment, and I would actually say we probably would take some decent losses if we tried to get into a war on the ground in Iran, because they would probably use a decent amount of drones against us, and because of that, we would probably see that we're not really acclimated to that sort of warfare or really have trained anyone for it, and there would probably be some decent losses as a result. So I do thank you for the incredible support and help with this channel to keep it running, Chef Danny B, and I hope that does answer that question well, and I hope that you have fun with that incoming snow tomorrow. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
And we also have a $33 support from Jack Ray. And thank you, Jack, as well, for that generous support. He said in 1960s, the USA CIA program, Operation Oxcart, was the A-12 high-speed, high-altitude interceptor program. And in the 2020s, the Cuban Operation Oxcart was an ox cart, literally.
Yeah, that is actually a pretty funny one right there. And also, if y'all don't, Matthew, do you know what the A-12 ox cart is?
That's the SR-71. It turned into that.
Yes, it is. Look at it. Wow. I like that. It's cool looking. Wow. You know, they had a little version of this thing that tested one of the engines solely. I forgot what that thing's called. But let me see here.
YF-12?
Maybe? No, it wasn't that. I think that was like the legitimate prototype for the SR-71. Let's see here. The engine, let's see. SR-71 engine drone.
I feel like we could use this
The
thing
D-21.
today. Like, I feel like we could use the SR-71 in a modern setting.
Look at it. Wow.
That is something right there. And that was a drone. That's the weird part.
Yeah, it was a drone. It was made to test out the kind of like force-feeding air system that the SR-71's engines have, if I'm not mistaken. And they were not really sure if that would actually work in real practice. And they did some wind tunnel tests of this, and they were like, it might work. And then they were like, well, we have to get it up to speed somehow to really make sure. And then they built this thing and tested it out. And then they're like, okay, so that concept does work. And then they used the lessons learned from this thing in testing to create the actual engines for the A-12 and the YF-21 and then the SR-71.
Yeah, it's weird too. That was a drone. If that was a drone way back in the day when this thing was made, I mean that might tell you how far along our drone tech's gotten.
Oh no, not really. I mean, this thing was actually kind of rudimentary. It was basically just like a simple gyroscope inside of it that kept it level in a straight line until it ran out of fuel. It wasn't anything incredibly advanced. It's not like it was remote controlled where they were able to make it take off, fly in a loop, and then come back and land. It literally just would take off, fly in a straight line, and then eventually come down somewhere, and then they would recover it. I think the few of these that were made, they generally would just break up somewhere over a testing range once they hit the ground, and then they'd be like, okay, well, that was successful. And then they'd start moving on from there, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong on that, so, don't take my word on that, folks. But outside of that, though, it
says here it was a supersonic reconnaissance drone that was used as an actual variant of aircraft. Like, it wasn't just a test vehicle. This was actually used to be a drone for high altitude surveillance.
I'm pretty sure that when I went to a museum for this thing, it said something like this was like a testing platform for the engines on the SR-71.
Here's what it says. It says the D-21 is an American supersonic recon drone. It was initially designed to be launched from the back of an M21 carrier aircraft. The drone had a maximum speed of Mach 3.3, and it was developed, obviously, before the SR-71. It was designed to carry a single high-resolution photographic camera, and then the drone would self-destruct later on. After it retrieved the camera information it needed to get, it would self-destruct.
Huh. So it sounds like the whole these things were never recovered thing was right, but basically everything else about the story was wrong.
Yeah, I think so. It sounds to me like it was actually taking photos and being used operationally. It wasn't just a test vehicle.
Huh. That's pretty interesting right there. I didn't know that about this thing. I had thought the entire time, folks, like I said, to bring this thing up, that it was just a little testing platform for the engines on the SR-71 and to see that the concept worked. Apparently, I was completely wrong on that. So I will have to eat my foot here on air, salt and pepper and everything, and say that I was wrong on that one because apparently my understanding of that was incorrect, unfortunately. But outside of that, the A-12 is quite nice, I will have to say. And, you know, the Cubans... That's the thing about the Cubans, you know, is that people here in the United States right now, some people, which I don't really think there's many of them, are like, Cuba poses a huge threat to the United States. It's like, how? What are they going to do? Well, they put nukes in Cuba. It's like, that it won't happen. It's like those people, I guess, don't know. And this is also why, like, I have to say, folks, that, like, I don't mean to sound like I always, like, beat down a lot of things that people bring up, but like most of the time, like 98% of the time, people bring up stuff that doesn't make any sense when you put it up against everything else. Putting nuclear weapons in Cuba makes no sense because the Russians can nuke us from Russia in 30 minutes time once the missile launches. The whole reason they ever put nuclear weapons in Cuba was because there were no missiles at that time in history that had the range to be fired from Russia and hit the United States. So then they moved into Cuba so that way they would have the range to be able to be fired into the United States. And even back then, the missiles were so limited in their capability, they weren't even able to hit everything in the lower 48. They were just able to hit most of everything along the eastern seaboard and kind of into the Midwest, and that was about it. You know, and technology's evolved a lot since then, and it's not necessary to do that anymore. And as far as listening posts go, if the Chinese really wanted to listen in to whatever sort of communications we have, they can just park a spy ship off of U.S. waters off of U.S. territorial waters and international waters, and just sit there and listen into whatever they want. And there's really nothing you can do about it because they're in international waters. We do that to them all the time, and basically everyone does it to each other endlessly. That's why the Pine Gap facility in Australia is such an important one to us down near Alice Springs, is because this facility, let's see if I can find it here really quickly. Where the hell is it? Well,
It's southwest of Alice Springs.
yeah, I'm looking southwest, and well, is it here? Oh, here it is, right here. Sorry, folks, it was just right southwest of the city. But that's why this one's incredibly important, because so far from what we know, there is no spy ship that can intercept the broadcast and the communications that are transmitted to and from Pine Gap in Australia. That's why it's in the geographical dead center of Australia. So generally, I just don't really see Cuba being that much of a strategic issue at the moment to really pose a necessity for us to conduct military actions against them, especially given that resources are about to be tied up elsewhere in larger conflicts, or are currently tied up in larger conflicts that we have to deal with right now. So, big thanks to you for the support. I hope that does address that well, Jack Ray. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here is going to go to none other than GunFox61, and he has 3 days in history for us. And thank you very much, GunFox, for that generous support, and we do appreciate that. And starting off with his first one, he said, today in history, 4/16 in 2014, the South Korean ferry Sewol, traveling from Incheon to Jeju, capsized and sank, killing 304 people. 1908 Natural Bridges Monument in Utah. Also a question from the chat.
And you know, it's actually kind of interesting that both of those happened kind of near to the same day, almost 100 years apart or over in history. Let me see if I can show you all a larger picture of the sinking of the seawall. Oh, you know, that's actually a pretty decent one right there. So the MV Seawall was actually a ferry in South Korea that went to Jeju Island. Jeju Island is this big one, by the way, down here. And it would would take transits, I forgot from where on the mainland, but down the Jeju and back. And on this day, they had overloaded the vessel, and it was very top heavy. And apparently, because of the top heaviness, the vessel just rolled over, and almost everyone on board died. It was actually a pretty significant sort of an incident. Let me see if I can get you all the number of how many people died on board. Out of the 476 people, huh?
Gunfox said 304 in his super jet.
I'm sorry. I was trying to. I'm sorry. I was getting distracted with trying to address all three of them at the same time. But there were 476 people on board, and 304 of them died, meaning there was about 75% fatality rate, or really more of 67% or so, on board the ship. So you had a 1 in 3 chance of surviving the capsizing of the seawall. And it changed a lot of the maritime laws in South Korea and such because of this tragedy, but a very crazy thing that happened pretty much at the same time that the Titanic sank, basically a day later in 1912, because that was on the 14th of April, this was on the 15th of April, but this was also a major one that changed a lot of maritime laws concerning safety and ship construction and such at the time, because as many of y'all will know, the RMS Titanic was marketed something kind of akin to an unsinkable ship, but that's actually a bit of a modern misnomer a little bit. It wasn't actually marketed as unsinkable. It was actually marketed as so well built, and it would take so slow to sink, it's practically unsinkable, but there was still an idea that the thing could sink, and that wasn't really even hidden from the public that much. It was just kind of said, and then it stuck. Because the concept back when the Titanic was built was that the transatlantic shipping corridor would be so busy that if a ship ran into a problem and it was sinking, the ship should be built as a lifeboat to last as long as it can and to sink as slowly as possible, so that way another ship could come up alongside and then eventually ferry all of the passengers from the stricken vessel to the intact one, and then everybody would be alive and fine by the time the ship actually went under. In reality, that didn't happen, because when the Titanic hit the iceberg, the closest ship, the Californian, didn't have a 24/7 telegraph operator to let them know that the ship had been hit and was sinking, and so the Titanic went without any aid until the Carpathia arrived several hours after the ship had actually sank, and most everyone, well, a significant amount of people on board the vessel had already died in their watery graves in the frigid waters of the Atlantic by that point. Pretty interesting shipping and naval, well, more so maritime tragedies.
I just don't. I never really understood the whole Titanic thing, because I know you're saying that they didn't say it was unsinkable, but I could have sworn I heard people saying that it was unsinkable, and I never really understood why that was the case. Personally, it was just like, I mean, you're able to install sinks in pretty much anywhere. Like, they make them in large sizes, small sizes. I mean, you could put a sink inside the Titanic. I mean, you could put multiple sinks in there if you wanted to. I mean, there's nothing preventing it. So I never understood why they said it was unsinkable.
Man, man, what the hell? Man, that's some craziness right there. Oh, you didn't have to do that to yourself. I mean, like, what the hell? Like,
I love it. I love it.
Man, Blood's beating himself down out here with his own soundboard. It's like, what the hell? You didn't have to do that. But yeah, it was interesting. It was an interesting time back then, because they knew, like, if you actually go back and look at the deep history, because I've looked at a lot of documentaries that a lot of amazing folks on YouTube have made about this, like Ocean Liner Designs, they never marketed the ship as unsinkable. Like, the White Star really didn't. Like, some people would go as far to say it's so well built, it's practically unsinkable, but they'd never say that it was unsinkable. They said it was incredibly safe, and yada yada yada. But for some reason in the modern day, people say it was the unsinkable ship, and even back then people knew that it wasn't going to be entirely unsinkable, because even the chief designer of the Titanic and the entire Olympic class knew that once enough number of watertight compartments were ruptured, the ship would obviously sink. There was just no way to avoid that. So a big thanks to you for the support and help with this channel to keep on running, Gunfox, because those are two very interesting naval tragedies. And also, actually, you brought up the Britannic, which is the sister ship of the Titanic, but generally kind of a similar incident. Well, not really, actually. The Britannic actually did you know this, Matthew? The sister ship of the Titanic, the Britannic, which became a hospital ship for the Royal Navy in World War I, hit a mine in the Aegean Sea near Greece coming back, I think it was from Gallipoli, and it took, I think, 4.5 hours for the ship to sink. So everybody was actually able to safely get off the Britannic, and I think only like 2 people or 3 people died, and I think that was in the initial mine explosion, I think.
And that must have been a damn vicious-ass, aggressive mime. I've never heard of a mime jack up a ship like that.
Man, I mean, let me see if I can pull up the Britannic wreck, because it is actually still down there, and you can see it. And let me see here if I can show you what they have of it today. Because I think the rupture from the mine is... I think that's a painting, actually, like a hyper-realistic one. But that was about the size, at least that is the rupture on the Britannic's hull from that one mine. I mean, mines are pretty strong.
Yeah, I would say that's a very strong mine.
Yeah, really strong one. But a huge thanks to you once again for support, Gunfox, and sharing those interesting days in history, because I find them to be wildly interesting, and I think that the rabbit holes that come out of them are deeply fascinating as well. Don't you all agree? Don't you? But a big thanks to you for the support. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And you addressed all of Gunfox's days in history?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, just making sure. So thank you very much, Gunfox, for that support once again, and we do appreciate it. And also, very interesting days in history. I don't know some of this stuff. Like history is not my strong suit. I didn't study it really. I study the more current stuff. So when I hear about the old time stuff, I'm thinking that's really crazy right there. Like I didn't know about the unsinkable thing. I didn't know about all that. So I learned something a little bit tonight about that whole situation. But thank you very much, Gunfox. We also have a 20 from Rosalie Love, who put in a 20 and said speechless.
Thank you so much for the
I mean,
support.
in general, it sounded like in general, maybe speechless. Was it about something specific?
Do you need therapy? Like, do you need speech therapy? It can be provided at some expense. But I do thank you for the support, Rosalie, and I hope that you can fix your speechlessness. I hope that we can listen to you talk again. And a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And also, by the way, just make it clear, I'm just joking, by the way, but thank you very much, Rosalie, for that $20 support. We do appreciate that. We also have a 20 from JMO75. He said the U.S. will eventually need to put boots on the ground, and I'm not sure how to open the strait any other way. And how would you open the strait?
Oh, that's quite a long answer in reality. Like, there's a million moving factors to a military campaign of any type, even for this scope. But the simple answer would be I would try and limit any ground operation to an absolute last resort. And my first action would just be to bombard anything that would threaten the freedom of navigation through the strait and see if that fixes the problem. If that doesn't fix the problem, then a ground invasion may be necessary. But that's generally the very basic rundown, the most basic rundown I could give on how I would try and clear the strait, because currently we've done everything but attempt to physically open the strait, which I find to be quite odd, you know, because everyone right now is saying, well, you know, the president's doing all of these five-dimensional chess moves that aren't doing anything to change the situation because we can't physically reopen the Strait of Hormuz with military force. But how do people know that when we haven't tried yet? Like, you know, if you tried, like, for example, in any other hypothetical war, if you tried to take, say, a fort on a coastline somewhere, and you attacked it once, and then you couldn't take it, now we know we can't take it. Then we move on to plan B, which is a siege. Instead of just looking at it, and we might have a chance of taking it, because, you know, we don't know, and then sitting there and going, you know what, instead of trying to take the fort, we're just going to siege it from the bat. You know, and maybe even let an enemy army come in and defeat us in the meantime while we're trying to fight the siege. I don't know why that mindset's been taken so far, because it's really ass backwards in my opinion, and we should try and physically reopen the strait, and then if that doesn't work, then we can do all of the stupid 5D gymnastic shit that they've been doing for 5 or 6 weeks now. But we should be doing that first before we get to this. We went to this first, and we didn't even try and physically reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which I think has been a mistake. But a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on the next one.
And we also have a $20 support from Ulf Hednar. And thank you very much, Ulf Hednar, for that $20 support. They said, I suspect if the U.S. refuses Article 5, that there is already an EU-Canada alliance that excludes the U.S. that will automatically get triggered, and basically NATO without the U.S., and NATO will never forgive the U.S. for something like that.
Generally, the U.S. could not invoke Article 5 or not accept a vote on Article 5, but that is fine, because at that point everyone else in NATO could just say, well, regardless of what the U.S. just voted, we're all in general consensus, NATO's under attack and we're going to go deal with this, and then they go and deal with it. And there's nothing that the U.S. can do because they're all taking that up on their own volition, but still operating as a unified NATO force just without the United States. So pretty much that sort of alliance that you're talking about already does exist. It just kind of exists within NATO itself, without the United States really having any involvement. But a huge thanks to you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I would have to say that NATO would probably never forgive that. And I don't think that they should at that point, because that would be an absolutely detrimental action by the United States of America and would be shooting ourselves in the foot here in this country for our own strategic interests. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I possibly can. And we are on to the next one.
Let's have a 20 from Pot. And thank you very much, Pot, for that 20. They said, I'm an armchair expert. Oh, really? I mean,
Oh.
we can always use some good upholstery. But they said, do you really think that Putin's nukes would really work after being ignored for decades?
Some of them will. It only takes a few of them because they have about 7,000 of them, I believe, on paper. And let's say that only 40% of those works. That's still 3,000 nuclear weapons. And I think that's what a lot of people kind of miss in the details of that statement is that, yes, even if 80% of the nuclear weapons are inoperable, there's still about 1,000 of them that work. And 1,000 of them is more than what Britain and France has combined. And it's about 20% of what we have here in the States. And that generally would be the issue is that, yes, I don't believe that a lot of nuclear weapons in Russia are actually operational. A lot like their military, a lot of them probably only exist on paper. But it doesn't matter because regardless of even the overwhelming percentage of them that are inoperable, there's still a huge number of them physically that are operational. And we really have no way to defend against anything more than 30 ICBMs coming at us, and the Russians clearly have more than that are operational, probably a few hundred, and then they have a few hundred tactical nuclear weapons that they could use as well, and that still poses such a major threat that they're still largely a nuclear power, regardless of how many others don't work. But a big thanks to you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, and with that, we're on the next one.
Also, by the way, I see someone in the chat mentioned this. I'm not sure if you heard about this or not, Andrew, but I see that Emily B said in the live chat, the vote on the FISA 702 language is scheduled for 2:15 a.m. tonight, or in the morning, that is.
What, that early?
I guess so. I didn't know when they were voting on it. But also, by the way, folks, if y'all didn't know this, by the way, I briefly discussed FISA the other day, and apparently that piqued the interest of a lot of people that are apparently familiar with that, because I got like a couple emails about that from people that are apparently in the know about it. So I'm very interesting about that. But the FISA 702 language is currently about to be voted on in the Congress. It's coming up here very soon. And FISA 702 is controversial because basically what that is, it's basically the provision for warrantless mass surveillance for foreign intelligence collection, basically. But the problem is, though, it's also warrantless mass surveillance that ends up catching up Americans in it as well. So we had been told that the current admin was not friendly to it, but all of a sudden today there was a flip, there was a complete change, and now all of a sudden FISA 702 is being advocated for, and they're advocating to keep it. So we were expecting that it was going to disappear, but of course, once liberties are given up, they usually don't come back. And it looks like FISA 702 is going to pass yet again, which is a little bit disappointing on one respect, but on a different respect, I will say that, you know, in this current environment, it's probably useful, but at the same time, it's useful, but just because something's useful doesn't mean it doesn't trample on the rights of Americans. And it's kind of like a Patriot Act situation, kind of like with that. It's a little bit of a catch-22. It does help catch terrorists, but at the same time, though, it literally tramples on our rights like a bull in a china shop, basically. Like, it's really awful with the way that works. So, did you know about that?
Yeah, I'd heard about that, and I heard that apparently, you know, someone up there who talked about how the FISA courts were going after him and persecuting him. Oh, and now it's a great thing. It's like, oh, that's great. You know, always love someone who sticks with their word and never, you know, just basically misrepresents something and then does something else. You know, that's always great to hear. You know, kind of like any normal politician at that point. You know, like speaking of anti-establishment, it's like that is the establishment.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that's ridiculous.
And also, I see people saying journalists get targeted. Well, here's how you become a target under FISA 702. If you have any contact with anybody in a foreign country, you're automatically subject to FISA 702. So we're probably subject to it, I would imagine, because, you know, and obviously you don't have to get a warrant for that. So if the U.S. government wants to, for example, spy on us, I mean, technically under FISA 702, they only have to get a warrant. They can start, you know, doing whatever they want to, you know, surveil us if they wanted to. That's under that provision. So, I mean, obviously that has some civil liberties concerns to it because you're supposed to get warrants. You're not supposed to just be allowed to, you know, surveil people without a cause and without having to explain that to a court. You're supposed to get that permission through a warrant through a court. But under FISA 702, they can get around it. And, you know, FISA 702, just to give you some more background information about it, that provision of FISA was actually designed to legalize the mass surveillance programs that had been initiated and deployed before FISA 702 was actually implemented. It was designed to protect people that were involved in the mass surveillance program that was started by the U.S. government. So it essentially retroactively legalized what they did and basically saved a lot of people's asses that could have gotten in trouble legally for what they did. It saved all their asses. So if y'all think that's ever getting repealed, y'all got a different thing coming for you. That will never get repealed ever. It's here to stay.
Yeah, it is. It's not really the greatest thing. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next super chat goes to Mr. Light Rail, who said, "Do you think if Russia invades NATO, that NATO will send troops into Ukraine to hurt Russia or divert them?"
They definitely probably would at that point, because it would probably be considered a united front against the Russian Federation, but they would probably send most of their battle forces towards the Baltics to protect the territory that's being invaded on their end. And so generally, while there might be some forces that go into Ukraine, that wouldn't be the primary front that NATO would be fighting on. We would primarily be fighting in the Baltics and Finland, most likely. But a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep it running. I hope that does address that well. And also, I just saw someone say, a keyword legally. Yeah, that doesn't really mean much of anything, though, because there's really no oversight to it. So whether it's lawful or not, it doesn't really matter. It's basically like saying, for example, that cops can really do only these certain things under the law, but they get qualified immunity for literally everything. Like, that would be basically the equivalent of that, because it's like, well, technically, they can't do unlawful actions, but there's no way to sue them or hold them accountable for anything because they have qualified immunity to everything. So then at that point, there's no way to really prosecute any policemen. So they can do whatever they want, whether it's lawful or not, and no one can stop them because there's no way to stop them under the legal system. And that's basically the same thing with the FISA court, or more so, not the FISA courts, but the entire FISA system, is that there's no oversight or accountability to that, and no public transparency whatsoever to see that any sort of unlawful use of it could be brought to countenance and could possibly be brought before a court to see that some action is taken against any unlawful actions of FISA. There's no way to even know for the larger part or to follow through with that. So that's kind of the issue. And so, the keyword legally doesn't really mean anything if you can't prosecute unlawful actions due to either the lack of transparency or how the system operates and functions. But anyways, with that, we're on the next one.
On the flip side of it, I will say this: like, I'm not for trampling on Americans' rights. I'm not for that. But on the flip side, I will say that if the U.S. had to get a warrant for every situation that they needed to do surveillance for national security reasons, that would be extremely cumbersome. I will admit that, because in order to catch terrorists that are planning things that are obviously heinous, you have to be able to flag those people. You have to be able to do that. And people plan stuff. I mean, they've gotten clever. Like, they've planned stuff through gaming chats. Like, they'll jump on gaming platforms and start planning heinous actions through there, and they've gotten caught doing that recently. So then they expanded the surveillance to cover gaming platforms as well, because they found out that these lunatics are over there and they're trying to do that on these platforms. So I will admit it's useful in one respect because it lets them flag people ahead of time, and they can generally get leads that way and stop attacks. Well, on the other hand, though, it's like one rogue person gets in office that has, bad intentions, and they're not worried about the Constitution, and they happen to want to trample on the rule of law, and they happen to have contempt for anybody trying to put restraints on them, constitutional restraints. It takes one person like that to get in charge, and then all of a sudden that system becomes an absolute sword against the American people that you can't reverse.
That's true, but I would generally say there's really no way to justify a loss of liberty at all for security, because our original founding fathers, like Benjamin Franklin, said that if you would exchange liberty for security, then you deserve neither. And I would say that that's definitely true, because we could make the country as safe as we want to. The Soviet Union would go to would go to any length through the KGB to root out any internal civil dissent whatsoever, even to the point that just a suspicion was good enough to go and get someone. And that was incredibly efficient in keeping the Soviet system running, because there was absolutely no dissent whatsoever. Everyone followed the top man and followed along to a T. A very efficient system, if you look at it from a point of administration. There is no dissent. Everything goes exactly the way you want it to, and there's no opposition to it inside of the country. But at what cost? Like, and on top of that, not to bring up the all common example of, back in Germany, but, back in Germany, back when the Gestapo existed, during that era, they would go and gather all of the hereditary data on everyone in Germany. And if you were even a slight part Jewish, they would go and get you or suspicion you. Even if you were even if you had Jewish ancestry to such a small degree that you technically weren't a Jew, according to the German government, they would still surveil you even while you were living in your normal life, and would also discriminate against you based on that. And that was hardly with the intelligence gathering capabilities that we have today. Now imagine if a government has some sort of a prerogative, much like the German government did with ill intent, because there are people who are involved in operating the U.S. government, so there's always the chance of ill intent. Imagine someone being able to get all information on you on the internet, and then they have ill intent, and then they're able to follow through with that, and all the other surveillance systems that they have as well in the privacy of your own home and everywhere else. What in the world could they do with that, and what kind of damage could be inflicted upon the common citizen here in America, much like was committed upon the average German and the average Soviet of times of old? And there's my question.
All they could do now is harass you if they wanted to do something about that. They can't prosecute you with information that they got from without a warrant. They can't do that. That would be thrown out in the court. So the moment a prosecutor tries to go after somebody using evidence that was gained through that means, they couldn't use it. Unless there's some basis on a foreign intelligence, like espionage charge or something like that, maybe they might be able to use it there. But it's like they couldn't just go use that to prosecute somebody. Like if they're investigating somebody for having suspicious ties with like a foreign government or something like that, they can't go and go on a fishing expedition and start looking into everything you've ever done and then find something to prosecute you on, because eventually in court it'll come out, well, hey, where'd you source this evidence from, prosecution? And they'll have to reveal where they got it from. And once they do that, well, that's the fruit of the forbidden tree. You can't use that to prosecute somebody with that. So there are legal protections, like even with mass surveillance, you can't get prosecuted on most of that stuff unless they decide to just make up a whole fake scenario about how they got the information. They could try to do that. But it'd probably be unlikely to succeed.
Well, that's operating within the parameters of the law. What if, for example, someone didn't like you and they said, "Oh, look at what this person is doing on the internet here or there, or look what they're typing in here or whatever. Let me leak that to the press to destroy their reputation on the side of the privacy, in the privacy of what they're doing on the internet. Let me go leak that out to the public to try and destroy their reputation." What if that happened?
That could be troublesome too, depending on who it is and stuff like that. But ultimately, though, it could be found out where they got that. Like, for example, if they go leak something like that to some outlet and then they publicize it, that publication could get sued potentially for publicizing that private information.
That might not stop them. Or, for example, a president of the United States could just put out a tweet, "Look at this stupid person here," and then, just put out everything that they were able to find on them, basically all the dirt that they could get from any angle inside their house or whatnot. That's pretty concerning right there, having that power within the hands of maybe an individual person or the government agency, for example.
Yeah, I would agree. Got to watch out for rogues getting in charge, by the way. They might leak your nudes.
They might. You never know. But with that...
which actually be a crime, by the way.
Nothing that some person does within their office is unlawful as long as they're doing it within the capacity of the president. Remember that Supreme Court ruling? It's within national security. It could be, it could be anything like that. Oh, and here comes someone usual. You start bringing up breaches of privacy. No, I remember when all you people were going crazy back in the earlier part of the decade when y'all were claiming that everyone was breaching your privacy left and right to make sure that you were not trying to spread some sort of an infection of some sort. I always love how no one ever looks at this equally across the board as invasions of privacy are just not acceptable. Everyone always acts like it's justifiable when they agree with the invasion of privacy, but then it's completely unjustifiable when they don't agree with the invasion of privacy. An invasion of privacy is an invasion of privacy whether you like the reason it's being done for or not. I work on solid and sound principles that a moral policy is a moral policy. It doesn't change depending on who's saying it from what political party. But anyways, with that, we're on to the next one.
Our next super chat goes to Game Theory, and thank you, Game Theory, as well, for that 20. They said, "You got me on a food kick with pizza. Do you have a mod pizza out there in Salt Lake that creates your own personal pizza at Mod Pizza?"
I think I don't know actually. Um, there was a pizza place that sounded kind of like that, I think, but I don't think I've ever been to a mod pizza. There's this really good pizza chain out here called Mountain Mike's Pizza, and there's a couple of them across Salt Lake. That one's really good in my opinion. I really love that one. It's actually supplanted Papa John's for me as being my favorite pizza joint. And that one's really good. I mean, like I love that one a whole lot. But I don't know if we have a mod pizza. I'm not entirely sure. I wouldn't know on that one. But I do thank you for the support and help with this channel to keep on running. And I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And we also have a 20 from Fred Freeman yet again. And thank you very much, Fred, for the second support of the night. He said, the U.S. will be there for NATO. The Russians cannot take the island. And excuse me. Let me restart. Fred said, the U.S. will be there for NATO, and the Russians cannot take the island. NATO already has plans. They will occupy Kaliningrad, still recognizing that Russia, that is not existential. And then NATO holds the line at the existing borders with Russia.
I would say, hopefully that would end up being the case. I hope that the U.S. would be there for NATO, because if we're not, things might be a lot more difficult for our allies, and that will also come back to bite us well in the future once they realize that we may have betrayed them. But a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep it running, and I hope that does address that well, incredibly well. And I also saw someone say, how many times did you give DNA samples to the government during that time of the pandemic? But they can get that anyway, though. Like I don't think a lot of people realize that there's so many different ways to do stuff. Like everyone's like, well, if they need to track you, they do so. Well, they can track you through your phone, and they don't need anything else to track you with. DNA samples. I mean, if you go in for say you ever get booked somewhere, for some reason, they got your fingerprints, and then not only that, if they really wanted to get your DNA sample, everyone's always dropping a hair follicle here and there everywhere. All they have to do is go into the holding cell you're in, grab the little hair follicle with a tweezer, put it in a zip bag, and then send it off somewhere to go get the DNA sample out of it to then track you later through ribonucleic sequencing and stuff. I mean, that wouldn't be hard at all to do. I mean, like the old saying goes, there's always more than one way to skin a cat. And, that wasn't some sort of a mass government conspiracy to go gather, your DNA, because they could do that a million other ways. I mean, hell, you could spit in a cup and go mail it off to someone to get some cool little stats. And, you never know, they might sell that data to the government at some point, because, some companies might not have anything in their contract saying that they can't do that with your DNA once they receive it. So, there's that. But anyways, with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a 20 from Enzyme82, and thank you very much, Enzyme, for that support. They said, what is the info on the orchestra and choir that performs the LSA anthem and the opening medley? Were they expensive to hire, and who wrote the LSA anthem?
I wrote the LSA anthem. I was the one who actually wrote the lyrics, and then I spent a humongous amount of time, I don't even know how long it was, but it was dozens of hours, on Sono AI trying to make it sound exactly how it sounded in my head. And then it got close enough that I was like, that's good enough. And then I went to a composer whose name is Marcos Barilari, who works for Disney Pixar, and then I had him compose the actual orchestrated version, and then that was sent to Budapest Scoring in Hungary to actually make the live orchestral version of the medley and also the LSA anthem. As far as cost, it was incredibly expensive, and that's why it's going to be around forever, and that's also why it will never be removed or shortened down, because I already shortened out one complete song out of it, and they aren't cheap to make. It's about $1,200 a minute of sound in those videos. So generally, it was quite expensive, and I have to, and also on top of that, I didn't do that as a business expense. I did that as a personal expense, as a personal project, and then made it the intro of our stream every night. So, it's going to be around for a while, because I basically got to get a return out of investment on that thing, at least in my opinion. But a huge thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I got to say, long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die. And also, I hope that I answer your questions well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a 20 from Chris Feilbach yet again, and thank you very much, Chris, for that 20. He said there's a new 2026 sinking video on YouTube from the guys making the Titanic video game. I forget their names, but you might know them, and Ocean Liner Designs.
Yeah, I love Ocean Liner Designs. That's a great channel. He makes great videos. And yeah, I actually do know about that game. I've seen it a bit, and I'm looking forward to, I think, its complete release that's going to be happening at some point in the future. So, you know, I'll be looking forward to playing that game because it's going to be really cool. And it also is going to make the absolute interior of the Titanic explorable, literally every nook and cranny. And so a huge thanks to you so much for the support. I hope that has addressed that well. And also Transit Man 61 said, any rights as far as copyrights? Yeah, actually, with the commissioning of Budapest scoring, once they orchestrate it and all, and also the compositions themselves, I actually am the personal copyright holder to all of that. So we actually have the rights and everything to the composition, the scores and sheets, and also the audio itself of the orchestral recordings. So yeah, we actually have that all. And that's also why we get to use it every night, because I have the rights to it, and nobody can infringe on my copyright to play the music. And that was also another big thing about it, is that we wanted to have the rights to our intro, so that way there weren't any copyright issues in the future about that. But a huge thanks to you for a great question there, and also Good Oxygen said, Enforcer Spotify when? Maybe some point in the future. But with that, we are on to the next one.
You know, make sure if you're driving down the road and stuff like that, and you'll ever see like a raccoon on the road or something like that, just leave the raccoon alone, by the way. Like I saw someone mention this in the chat. Leave the roadkill alone. Like, don't go and try to mess with the roadkill. Don't do anything like that. Don't go try to cut the roadkill or anything like that. Like, there's people out there that do strange things to roadkill. Don't do that. And also, you know, oh man. But anyway, so do you know what I'm talking about, by the way? Do you happen to know?
The raccoon wiener for study incident, which came
Oh.
out today. Yeah, that one. Yeah, another real treasure.
That's a tough one right there. Leave the raccoons alone. Leave the
Yeah,
roadkill alone. Don't touch that.
You know, before this, man, I remember before this Secretary of Health came around, everyone was like, look at these Secretaries of Health. They're fat. They're not healthy. It's like, well, physically they're not, but mentally. Like, and then it's like, I saw a raccoon on the side of the road, so I cut off its thing and I studied it for later. It's like, what the hell? It's like, what
Also,
is
allegedly
this?
too. Like, I didn't like, don't mention the guy, but I don't, you know, it's all allegedly, just to make that perfectly clear.
I mean, you know, given the whole thing with the bear, you know, it's like, is that like, I'm not saying it actually did happen, but I mean, it's, you know, there's a decent amount of credence from all the prior stories we've heard that makes that sound like it's not unbelievable, you know?
Maybe.
But anyways, we are on to the next one.
We also have a 20 from Fallen, and thank you very much, Fallen, for that $20 support. He said, you got to watch out for those mimes. Super strong.
Oh, you gotta watch out for them. They love to do what they do. And they're scary, too. Mimes scare me, folks. They really do. Why are they imprisoned in this invisible chamber? I don't know. But a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep it running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a 10 from FPS Nolan, and thank you very much for that support, by the way. And he said, I'm more worried about what's happening internally far before any foreign attack. We're eating ourselves alive as a nation at the moment in LSA. And I would agree with you. The political extremists in this country right now, I've even made a Twitter post about this today. It's insanity what's going on in this country. Like, you know, people like just completely turn into like cult worshipers. And I'm not referring to one side. Like, I know everybody's going to think I'm just referring to the people right now that's in charge. It's not just them. It's everybody. Like, people have to realize that we have to be free thinkers. For democracy to work, you have to think on your own 2 feet. You have to have your own opinions, and you do not follow the crowd. You don't do that. That's what, when people start having this mob mentality, that's when countries and democracies start falling. Because democracy implies that each person has free will, and each person is educated enough to make their own decision about where the country should go and make an informed decision. And you can't make an informed decision if you're in a cult. It's not possible. So that cult-like, you know, you're either with us or against us mentality is going to destroy this country if it keeps up. But Enforcer, what say you?
Political extremism is something that I believe is one of the largest enemies of this country. On the left and the right, you have people that take advantage of people's good-willed nature to try and turn them into basically just vile, angry people filled with nothing but hatred that are looking at destroying the country from the inside out and viewing the other group as the enemy. And it's an absolutely ridiculous sort of a position to take, and a lot of people take it because right now, like you can go and listen to this, folks, on any right wing or left wing outlet. The right wing outlets will tell you that the left wing are domestic terrorists and they're trying to destroy the country and they're the enemy from within. And then if you go to the left wing channels, then they're going to tell you that the right wing is the enemy from within and they're trying to destroy the country and they're domestic terrorists. And they literally say the same thing about each other. And the reality of it is that if you look at it, they're both equally destructive to an extreme measure inside of this country as far as our nation's health is concerned. They are willing to destroy everything and destroy the health and longevity of this republic for the short-term gain of their political party to possibly gain just one more vote. And it's such a destructive way of running the political system that I'd be entirely honest with you that if it continues in this form for any longer, by either side, this country might not last for any more than several decades, and we'll mostly see the downfall of this country because of the stupidity and the rot that has consumed both political parties at this point.
Yeah, you know what's even worse than that is the everything's become politicized. But there was one thing that generally had not become at least highly politicized yet, and it was religion for the most part. Now religion is even getting politicized, which is perverting the hell out of people's religion in the country. I saw today a pastor came out and made a really, really stupid statement and tried to claim that the image that was posted by the president was not portraying him as Jesus Christ in the image, and said that people were ill-intended that were trying to say otherwise. I'm like, first of all, I'm like, should a pastor really be getting involved in something like that? It's like, that's really not something that a pastor should be getting involved with. It seems a bit strange to be jumping into like a fiesta quite like that one right there. It seems a little bit strange. And also, then we're seeing politicians start to attack churches, like attacking the Catholic Church. It's like, what are we doing here? So I thought there was supposed to be like a bit of like an understanding that those two things stayed separate. There weren't attacks being lobbed, and also, the church is getting involved and stuff like that. It's like, what is going on here? Like, it's a free for all.
Yeah, it really is, and also, folks, I think some of y'all are finally starting to get the idea that I've been saying for a while here on the channel, that religion should not be involved in politics at all. Because why in the world, like I'm just going to speak from my own perspective. Why in the world would I want my religion and my God to be perverted by a whole bunch of wicked, corrupt bastards in the government? Because that's all they're going to do with it. They're never going to elevate it to any level where it becomes respectable. They're going to beat down whatever religion they chose as the religion they're basically wagoneering on. And they're going to beat it into the ground and turn it into an absolute joke like they have right now. I mean, just a few days ago, the president made himself look like Jesus and then stated that he was a doctor in the Post. And then the Secretary of Defense today came out talking about how, ultra-Christian nationalist he is. And then he didn't even know, I guess, a verse from the Bible. And so he read a fake verse from Pulp Fiction, the movie, made by, I don't even know who the hell that was made by, Quentin Tarantino or something. It's like, like in most religious circles, people will look at that as blasphemy and heresy because, one, that's not even scripture, and two, no one is ever going to be able to take the place of the Son of God. Yet, if you put it in the political world, then it's totally fine and it's no big deal. It's fine to turn the faith into a joke because, clearly they're not meaning to do that and they're only doing it in innocence or in good jest. But it's absolutely abhorrent to look at because we don't mention this a lot on the channel because it's not really anyone's business, but we're Christians, and I think that it's much better to do things and have good morals that would suggest that we're people of sound moral construction, and then that be the representation of what we believe, more so than having to go around like a lot of people do and having to scream that they're Christians from the mountaintops while being the absolute worst examples of what anyone could call themselves a Christian should be. And seeing this kind of stuff...
You saw today that there was a politician that came out today and tried to claim that the president was the second returning of Christ today that I saw in a video.
I didn't see that one, but I wouldn't doubt
it. We're going to avoid naming people and stuff like that. Like, we're just going to keep it generic. But if you look it up, you'll find it. I mean, the fact that somebody would suggest that is insane, by the way. Like, that's absolutely insane that somebody would suggest that. And it's like, that shows how deep the politicization has gotten of everything. If people are starting to claim that a politician is the return of Christ, it's like, I think we've gotten pretty deep. I think we've gotten pretty deep in this right here. And then you have pastors jumping in and trying to put a political spin and use their congregation to start driving politics. It's like this has gotten sick. Like, this has gotten absolutely disgusting.
It is absolutely disgusting. I gotta tell y'all folks, just straight up on this one, it disgusts me so much that if you ever hear me have any disdain for any of those people who've been doing this so far, It is actually primarily for that, and mostly that alone, which we try and not portray on the channel a great deal, more so than anything else. Because the domestic politics stuff is always a shit show, and everyone's always unhappy with that, so that never really affects me too much. On the foreign policy side of things, that annoys me a great deal when people handle that poorly, which has been done the whole time we've been running this channel, and it's never gotten any better, and it's getting a little bit tiresome to watch it never get better. But the whole thing of sitting there and talking about we're going to create a theological state in the United States, which goes completely against the principles of the founding of this republic, and then to also take the very religion I believe in and then drag it through the mud, is the most insulting and angering thing that I've seen so far, that has made me wildly unhappy with a lot of stuff at the moment, and it makes it very hard for me to say even their names or their positions without almost making it a sneer, because of how much that's pissed me off, to be entirely honest with you all in the background. But that's my 2 cents. It's
also all the politicians. I hope this is revealing to people, because me personally, I've known people in my personal life that will look at politicians and say, "Oh, he's a good Christian man," or they'll say something like that, and I'll be like, I don't know. I'm like, hey, how can they really be? It's like they're in politics or in something that requires you to pretty much be a sneaky snake, like 24/7, where you have to kind of like bend and twist to whatever people want you to do, and you really don't have any opinions of your own, or otherwise you might not get elected. It's like, I'm not sure about that. And then you see, in the recent months and years, there's people out there that claim that they're a part of a certain religion, and then all of a sudden, when it's convenient, they start saying things that are obviously not consistent with the religion. It's like, it seems to me that should reveal to people that just because someone says that doesn't mean it's true, and they're using it as a prop to try to basically take advantage of you to a large degree. And if they're willing to do that on religion, imagine what other things they're willing to do that on. They're willing to bend and twist anything if they'll even do that with their own religion.
Yeah, well, and like that's I have to tell you all this, folks. This is my honest opinion. Whenever I hear a singular politician hawk a religion of any type at all, most of the time here in the United States, it's Christianity, because they're trying to get the evangelical votes. I immediately assume that person is the complete opposite of the faith that they're trying to claim that they're a part of, because I have the humility, folks, which many people in politics don't ever have, to know that while I'm a Christian, I certainly shouldn't go around shouting that from the mountaintops, because as the Christian faith will let you know, everyone's a sinner, and I'm certainly not going to be a great role model or example of the Christian faith. So best not to sit there and tell everyone from the mountaintop, I am the exemplar of the Christian faith, because I'm going to have many faults and errors. It's natural, everyone has them, and so I don't want that to reflect on the faith at all that I believe in. And I have the humility to say that and do that. And then if I was to run on politics, I would tell y'all I'm a Christian, but that's not why y'all should be voting for me at all. Because if you're looking for me to be a moral exemplar, I'm not in the papacy, and I'm not a pastor or a preacher. I'm running for a political position. It's a very dirty business for the larger part. Don't look here for role models in religion. But instead, other people will go out there and take advantage of people's goodwill and belief of whatever faith they profess, whether it be that they're a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim, and they'll go out there and I'm a Christian and I'm this great person, or I'm a Muslim and I'm this great person, and if you really want Muslim or Christian values, vote for me. They don't believe in that at all. They're using it as a manipulation tactic to get your vote. The last thing I do is vote for that person, because you're expecting them to have any moral compass. They have none. They're already hawking a religion, hardly believing in it, to try and get your vote. That's what I think about it, and that's also why I think that religion should never be involved in politics, because they just drag any religion that they attach themselves to through the mud. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. But a big thanks to you once again, and we're on to the next one.
Also, a 20 from Wantan Quadruple 8. Thank you very much, Wantan, for that support. He said, let's get historical. What do you say you about Baldwin? Is that the fourth?
Yeah, that would be Baldwin the Fourth.
Yeah, what do you say about Baldwin the Fourth taking on Saladin's 20,000 plus warriors, and later on letting Saladin letting all women, children, and remaining knights go when he took back Jerusalem from Balian of Ibelin? Great rabbit hole.
It is actually a great rabbit hole, but I got to tell you, Wonton, sadly, I don't know a lot about the Crusades, and I know that that's one of the latter battles of the Crusades, if I'm not mistaken. But it was a very different time back then, like exorbitantly different back then. Generally, Christendom and also Islam were relative, like very, like people wouldn't believe this, but they were very, very peaceful compared to what they are today. And while that it was one of the most violent eras between the two religions of Islam and Christianity, because we did have the Crusades and the Jihads at basically their zenith at that point, as far as how they would treat those who did not believe in their faith, it generally was pretty mild. Like they would tolerate them, which obviously they weren't like accepting of them and supporting them, but they would tolerate them if they lived within their territories, like those of the Ottoman Empire and those inside of most Christian kingdoms. And it was a very different time. Like people don't know that stuff. Like people these days act like if someone's of a different faith, you have to be a mortal enemy of them. But the reality of it is that you don't. You know, you can still like them and be nice to them. And that's, you know, if you're looking to convert people to your faith, that's probably going to be a better recruiting tool of being nice and kind to everyone instead of acting like they're the sworn enemy and they must be destroyed. You know, it's like, you know, I didn't, like, just to be honest, it's like I didn't really see Jesus going around and threatening people and beating them and stuff to turn them into Christians. I mean, it was his kindness that won people over, and people just completely miss that these days. But a huge thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep it running. And with that, we're on the next one.
Also have a 10 from Adam McLean, and thank you, Adam, as well, for that support. He said, this super chat is because every single time I tune in, these guys never let me down, and LSA.
And I got to thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And long live the Lee Spring Army, and the Lee Spring Army will never truly die. And with that, we're on the next one.
We also have a 10 from Dan Brooks. He said, is it possible that all the NATO-US bickering could be a ruse of a weakening?
I don't think so. I think that this is a legitimate thing. Like, the current administration has some sort of a deep-seated hatred for Europe for some reason. I don't know how to explain it, but they don't really like them. So I think that this isn't some sort of a feint. I think this is legitimately their intention. But a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
Our next one goes to Soka67, and thank you for that 10 as well. They said, that's regular Army fuel chow at any given FTX. And anyone who has served knows that's the norm in the field.
And yeah, like it's not good at all. It's pretty rough stuff. And I saw someone come in earlier and say that Enforcer's not true. It's only an unsupplied fobs. It's like, you know, well, believe it or not, there's unsupplied fobs. That's why there's that exception. And you know, and most people I've ever heard from over there, they always said, "Oh, it was shit. The food was terrible." Like because I was asking, "Is the food good?" And they're like, "No, it's bad." But a big thanks to you for support and helping the show.
When did they get MREs though? You know, like the ready-to-eat meals and stuff like that.
That's generally whenever there's not like a field kitchen or a mess hall or anything like that available. That's when the MREs are given out.
Hell, I'd rather have the MRE than whatever that rubber was on that dish.
I mean, honestly, I would too. Like at that point, it's like I think anything's better than the soul from shoe. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Benjamin Laszlo, puts in a 10. He said, look up Benny's Beans. He said, it's that good coffee right there. And also, thank you for the news you report.
And thank you so much for the support, Benjamin Laszlo. And I got to say, we will have to look that up and maybe get some of them beans. And so a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep it running. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And we also have a 10 from Shauna. And thank you, Shauna, for that support. They said, those laughs are contagious. Big thanks.
And thank you so much for the support, and I hope that they are. We always try and give people a little bit of laugh because the news is what it is every day, but it shouldn't overwhelm people anyways. And a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep it running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
We also have a 10 from Adam McLean, and thank you very much for that support as well. And Adam said, what is the cost of gas in Russia right now, LSA?
Unfortunately, I don't think I would know at the moment. So sadly, I'd have to declare ignorance on that one. But a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep it running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
It's 67 rubles per liter, and that translates to about 89 cents per liter. So it sounds like it's about on par with the U.S. Per gallon cost if you translate that liters to gallons. So it sounds like it's pretty comparable.
It kind of does sound like it's somewhat comparable. But with that, we are on to the next one.
We also have a 10 from Pacific Fruit Express, who said, today I'm not giving my 2 cents, just my $10.
Oh, well, thank you so much for the support, Pacific Fruit Express, and keeping the name of the Pacific Fruit Express alive. And a big thanks to you for support. And with that, we're on the next one.
We also have a 5 from Joppy 1992. He said, about Gotland, if a larger war were to begin, I hope you mean against NATO, because Gotland is Swedish land territory, thus activating Article 5, regardless if a Baltic nation has been invaded or not.
Now, that is true, Joppy. You're absolutely correct on that. And a big thanks to you for support. And with that, we're on the next one.
We also have a 5 from Bobo Yazala. He said, can you explain what happened in the port of Ust-Luga again?
So Ust-Luga got hit pretty badly by Ukrainian drone forces, and most of the oil loading port facilities were knocked out in those attacks. The gas fractionation unit at the LNG part of the port, which is right here, wasn't hit from what we could tell, but the oil loading port was generally knocked out of operation for some time while repairs were affected. So I hope that does address that the best I can, and with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a 20 from Star, and thank you very much, Star, for that 20. They said, I'm back again. Welcome back. I'm back in business, back in the building. You know what they say. There's nothing to worry about China. That's what they call them, China. I didn't send nothing, allegedly. He's agreed to stop sending Iran weapons. That's what they told me. Stop weapons. Stop the weapons. Turn off the lights. You don't want to see it. Let them scatter like roaches. I don't know what that last part is right there. That sounded a little bit sus, but he said that's the art of the deal.
And I gotta thank you greatly for the support in helping the show to keep on running, Bishop. It wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to talk about the amazing art of the deal, because nothing says art of the deal like failing to make so many deals. It's really great, but a big thanks to you once again. And with that, we're on to the next one.
It's called art. There's no winning in art because you can't have art. There's no winning and losing in that. It's just something that you either have or you don't. It's just something.
What if a bomb falls in your head right now? Like
the failure can be a bit beautiful itself, depending on how beautiful that failure is. Nobody's failed quite like that guy, I tell you what. But anyways, moving on to our next one here. This one goes to DWRB, who puts in a 10. He said, what's your take on the Chinese oil situation and the reports of them hitting crucial levels around June the 8th? And do you think they'll put pressure on Iran to surrender or sign a peace treaty?
Generally, I don't know if they might be able to put significant pressure on Iran, but it really is unknown whether the Iranians would relent to that pressure, because Iran might be able to go it on their own, because China's only given them bougie weapon systems, but generally, as long as they're able to always ensure that they can control the strait and blockade it, they really don't need bougie Chinese weapons to be able to do that. It's probably going to be the case that China will also run out of fuel as well and start dealing with critical fuel shortages. But as far as them being able to pressure the Iranians to reopen the blockade, I'm not sure if that would be a success. But a big thanks to you for support. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a super chat from Live Animal, who said, it seems crew members of the Gerald R. Ford will become a country in the sea.
Basically, basically they'll be out there so long, it's basically like a floating nation almost at sea.
Oh.
And it basically may as well be a lot crazily enough, I find this so interesting, folks, because a lot of people talk, and I gotta say, folks, I find this so hypocritical, and I just gotta point it out because it annoys me every time I hear it. So many people say that they have respect for our armed forces, but when we see unbelievably long deployments to the point that it's basically almost cruel or unfair to those soldiers who are volunteers, and then we see them being given shitty food. Those very same people who say, oh, I love the armed forces, God bless the armed forces, and then once you point out, hey, that kind of seems a little unfair to our service members, we ought to be treating them right. It's the military, MFer. It's like you're just still those people are just stupid and they don't know what the hell they're saying. I mean, it's you can't say that you love the armed forces, you respect them, and treat the individuals in the armed forces like shit, like they don't count, because that's how they'll never re-enlist. Right now, people have been talking for years about, oh, the enlistment numbers are plummeting, we're not meeting quotas. It's this is how you make sure that you don't meet quotas, is that these guys who have enlisted aren't going to re-enlist, because their time in the service was so bad, anything else would be better in their minds at this point. And it's that's just something that's ridiculous to me. These guys should be coming home. It's I don't even at this point, if it made the strategic situation more difficult to handle, it's we have citizens of the Republic that have volunteered to serve this nation on that ship. We should not be putting them out to sea for 10 months to 12 months at a time. That's just wildly unfair to them. They haven't seen their family. They haven't seen anything for that entire time. They should be returning back to the States, and they should get some shore leave for possibly a month or two before the carrier's ready to go out again. But a big thanks to you for the support and helping this channel to keep it running, and I hope that has addressed that well. And with that, we're on the next one.
We also have a $20 support from Wantan Quadruple 8 once again, and thank you, Wantan, once again for that support. He said, I've been going down the rabbit hole of the Crusades in ancient history. It's insanely interesting, especially seeing what we have forgotten and repeated, and war changing to drones and less face-to-face people take things for granted.
Yeah, the Crusades is an interesting time. It's actually one that I haven't really historically studied a great deal, because generally I kind of avoid mainstream historic topics. The only one I don't really avoid Well, the only one that I basically go on my way to steer into is World War II, because I know that a lot of people know the history of the Second World War, so a lot of people will relate to that here on the channel. But generally, the Crusades and that sort of a period, along with the jihads, is one that is so misunderstood in popular opinion publicly in here in this country and elsewhere around the world, that it's really hard to find interest in that topic, because you just have a whole bunch of like sweaty dudes in like stained shirts going Deus Vult all the time, and it because of that, it's always been hard for me to get interest in it. It is a wildly interesting topic in history, like I will admit that, but that's generally why sadly I just never really researched or delved into it a lot. I always went for the more niche topics like the pike and shot era and the late Middle Ages, such things as that, like the Hussite Wars and all, because they generally don't have like that mainstream aura attached to them, so I find them to be a lot more interesting, a lot easier to sift through to the actual facts and info. But outside of that, I gotta say huge respect to you, by the way, for actually getting interested in reading into that, because that's something that I never could do because of the mainstream kind of like persona that's been built around it. But I gotta say, it is one that I really do need to study on, because it's a very interesting time. And generally, as far as theologies have evolved over the past 2,000 years, it is very interesting to look at them, because a lot of people don't know it, but religion itself and the way that people practice it and believe in it has changed a lot over the past 2,000 years, in Christendom alone, and in Islam as well, and many other religions. But a big thanks to you so much once again, and with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a 5 from Devin Seals. He said, brah, Swedenese, Finland, Sweden, who the hell Swedenese? But he said, this super chat starting wild, Devin. But he said, brah, Swedenese, Finland both require all those civvies to be weekend warriors, and they like guns. They good, and interdicting a ship is like child's play.
I mean, I suppose. But big thanks to your support with the channel to keep it running. And we're on to the next one.
We also have a 5 from Dago, and he said for a gallon of gas. Actually, that might get 1 gallon. But he said
it will.
It will. Oh man. Oh. But they said anyways. Though, let me try to get my mind out of that little gutter right there. A gallon of gas. Oh. But praying for peace and unity, for Russian leadership to find God. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. But I said, enforcer, GoFundMe for the Carpathian mountain trip materializes.
Oh, that'd be cool. And also thank you for the gallon of gas. I would like to go to the Carpathians. They look really pretty. Like, this is what they look like. The Carpathians of Ukraine, actually. But the Carpathians actually range through a good amount of countries. I'd still like to see it. Honestly, hot take, it kind of looks a little bit like the Appalachians, doesn't it?
It kind of does, actually. It looks a little bit like the Appalachians.
Actually, that's really cool looking. Like, that's actually pretty neat looking. I would like to go there, though. I would like to go there and see the Carpathians for myself. But a huge thanks to you for the support and helping the channel to keep them running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
I want to just sell everything. I want to sell my house, my car. I want to sell everything. And I just want to put all my stuff in one backpack and go marching through the woods through Europe and stuff like that. Berlin, but not that. We want to go from one city to a different city in Europe through the woods. Would they allow that? I don't know. I
got a great idea for you, Matthew. You could march from Berlin to Warsaw, and then Berlin to Copenhagen, and then Berlin to Paris, and then you could try and cross the channel and then fail, and then you go from Berlin almost to Moscow, and then you walk all the way back, you basically recreate the Second World War that way.
Yeah, I think it'd be cheaper to live that way with the cost of rent, gas, and everything else. I think it'd be cheaper just to, I think it'd be cheaper just to be basically homeless.
Pretty much. Honestly, folks, I would love to travel, like, around the world and everything, but sadly, our job has put some limiters on where we can go. Some people, the Chinese Communist Party, would like to have a word with us, so travel in China, completely out of the picture. I really wouldn't want to go there anyways, to be honest with y'all, even if we weren't doing this. But outside of that, I would love to go to Europe, and I would love to go to South America and Central America. And I would also like to go to most countries in East Asia, except for China and North Korea, which are completely off of the menu. I don't care if they reopen tourism to North Korea. I'm never going.
You know what I could do? I could just sell everything. I could get 1 Starlink to put in my backpack, and I could just simply set up shop at the end of the day around stream time. Wake up the next day, start hitchhiking. You know what I'm saying? Just hitchhiking across Europe or something like that, and just living out in the woods.
Man, you could probably like build like a small cabin out there in the woods and go live in that, and be completely off the grid and self-sufficient. Maybe write something like the Industrial Revolution has been a consequence. Like, I don't know. You can do whatever you want to. It's you're off the grid. You're off the grid. But then the government will come and get you because you're technically not living anywhere and you can't camp out that long and all that, But yeah, whatever. But anyways, oh man. But with that, we're on to the next one.
Our next one goes to Davey King, and thank you, Davey, for that 5. He said, hello there, team. I've just been able to tune in, and are you able to give me a brief overview of the war news from around the world? Love your work, Davey.
So today the Russians threatened to invade the Baltics, and let's see here. Let me think. I'm trying to think of the other big thing. Honestly, it's so hard to do that on the spot. I'm not going to lie. Like, I have the whole monologue in my head, and I can do that for like 2 hours straight. But when anyone asks me to
sum it up.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can sum it up. Here's the challenge. How few words could you use to like sum up like what the situation is in the world?
Well, if you keep it up at that rate, it's going to take many. I
was just about to say that. I just used about 20 words just to say that simple sentence right there. Well, let me make a complex sentence. The world is a dangerous place. Go ahead and buckle up. That's my conclusion right there. I'm gonna wrap it up right there. How would you say it, eh?
Well, I wouldn't say how. Like, I wouldn't do that. Like my summary would be, Israel and Hezbollah got into a ceasefire today. And then that wasn't really much. Tehran looks like they're getting back on a war footing with the United States. Both of the blockades from Iran and the U.S. are still ongoing and really hasn't done much to either side, at least directly at this point. China also looks like they're providing weaponry to Iran, or at least radar systems. Russia is also threatening to invade the Baltics and possibly Finland and Sweden as well. Europe is still trying to get ready for that, and Ukraine also hit Tuapse today pretty heavily and damaged it significantly. So that, I think, would probably be the best recap of the news we have right there in a nutshell. So big thanks to you for support and help with this channel to keep it running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
Also a 5 from Game Theory, who said, do you believe AI users are creating a new religion?
Nah. I mean, new religion.
That Moltbot was.
Yeah, but I mean, new religions though are pretty hard to catch on. Honestly, most of them don't really get that far. So I don't think so. But a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep it running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a 5 from Frank Trujillo. He said, hit the like, LSA Army, and thank you.
Hey, and hit the like, folks. We have gotten 4,400 likes. And to let you know the actual like ratio on this stream, it is 94%. That's quite good, actually. That's really good right there. And so please do hit the like button.
6% of bastards.
Man, 6% of people hate this channel. We have people, folks, that literally hate watch the channel, and they hit the dislike button every night. Like, it's the same number of people basically every day. And I kind of find it funny, because they hate this channel, but they can't stop watching it. And so...
them enforcers got TDS.
These damn kids are stupid. Anyways, I'll be back tomorrow.
These kids are so stupid. I'm showing up every night to listen.
Man, these damn kids are so stupid they run in the top 20 YouTube channel. Damn idiots. Man, I just gotta say, folks, whenever anyone comes in and says, we don't know what we're talking about, it's like, I would believe that if we, only had, 5 live viewers, but, we've got people watching who were in the military, who are in the military, and, and a whole bunch of other people we don't even know about. I mean, hell, basically almost everyone out there at this point watches this channel. It's like, if we didn't know what we were doing, the BS would be called a lot more to where we don't have anybody watching. It's like, sure, we get things wrong from time to time, but if we're shooting the odds here, we have an 85% chance that most of our analysis and statements end up being dead on the nail, and the other 15% are wrong. But that's pretty good odds, because most people out there are running about an 85% odds that they're getting everything wrong, and about 15% of the time, they get something kind of right. But anyways, with that, we're on the next one.
Also, a big shout out to Blazant, who put in a 3, and thank you very much, Blazant, as always, for that support. And we also have a 2 from Vitaly Sondra, who said, why is the U.S. trying to invade Cuba? Is it legal?
I don't even know why we're trying to invade Cuba. It makes no strategic sense. And someone's about to say, oh, you just don't understand. The president's playing 5D chess. If you can't understand it, it doesn't make sense. Like, if a homeless person on the side of the street that is zooted out on meth tells me that the aliens came by and probed him up the rear end, I'm going to sit there and say, that sounds like that doesn't make sense, and I think this guy is full of shit. I'm not going to sit there and go, well, maybe this guy's got 200 IQ, and he's got a lot of, he's saying stuff I just don't understand. Now, if it sounds stupid and it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. That's just how it works. And I don't really know what the whole thing with Cuba is. It's stupid and it doesn't make sense. It's like, why are we doing it? And they never really explain why. It's that, they're communist or something. It's like, well, yeah, but they've been communist for like 70 years. That's nothing new. So, we've kind of gotten used to that at this point. They're poor. It's like, yeah, they're poor, but that's not really our problem. That's kind of their problem that they need to figure out eventually. So maybe leave them alone for that one. I just don't get it. Like, to be completely frank with you, I don't know why we're going to war with Cuba. It makes no sense to me, and we got bigger fish to fry, like we've been saying for a while. But a big thanks to you for the support and helping this channel to keep it running. And with that, we are now moving on into the live chats. But due to time constraints, we're only going to be able to get the Morse code decoders and 3 live chats, and then we're going to be rounding this thing on out for the night. So, Matthew, what do we got?
Let's make it 5 for old time's sake. Let's make it 5.
I thought we were trying to cut down the stream times.
I don't know. I'm just feeling generous tonight because I feel like we're only getting 3 like all the times these days. So let's make it 5 for the audience.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, with that, we're on to the Morse code decoder. So what do we got?
And tonight we have the entire roster: Paul, Kevin, Mason, Joni, Norm, Arabelle, Heroya, Fluffiness, Koshko, Tarek, Sire, and Brian. And they said the Morse code says it looks like everyone wanted their last kicks before the ceasefire and LOT, LOSA.
And ding. And that's the sound of money. Y'all hit that down on the nail. That is the Morse code message of the night. I got to congratulate y'all greatly on getting that correct time and time again, because if it wasn't for folks like y'all, we wouldn't be able to hear that Morse code message every night and let the audience know what it is. All 10,000 people, crazily enough, who were still here about 3 hours and 45 minutes in. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the 5th to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Dan Brooks, who said, didn't China send radar units in the 12-day war?
Yes, they actually sent them after the 12-day war, technically, but pretty much, yeah, they announced they were going to be sending them during the 12-day war, and then they really didn't do Iran any favors at the beginning of this war, because most of them got blown up within the first week of the conflict. So, yes, they actually did do that, and so I hope that does address that incredibly well, and with that, we're on to the 4th to last question of the night.
This one goes to DL Hemingway, who said, should we let Russia carry through with their threat in the Baltic?
No, hell no. No, we should not let them carry through with that. We should be facing them. If the U.S. government had a spine and actually cared about what we have built and what we have, instead of whatever the hell they're thinking, we would actually be down there facing the Russians in the Baltic right now and basically meeting them at the head. Because you can't invade the Baltic states if the first guy you have to shoot at is a U.S. soldier. That generally makes the bar really high for the Russians to start a war, because they're going to be like, the first guy we try to shoot is going to be an American. And all hell is going to break out once that happens. So probably best not to do that. And that's what we should be doing. That's what we should have done in Ukraine, and we didn't do it then. And the same kind of weakness back then that led to the Ukraine war starting is going to happen again, but this time with NATO itself. Gotta tell y'all, the strength coming out of the U.S. government is insurmountable. Like, just getting a little sarcastic there, but it's annoying to watch history repeat itself in such a short amount of time. But I hope that does address it the best I can. We actually have a super chat here before we get to the 3rd to last question of the night. So what do we got, Matthew?
This one goes to DWRB. He said that Cuba might be more of a consolation prize within the bigger scope of taking down the Russia-China aligned network.
Yeah, but the thing is that it's like, what kind of consolation prize does it have? There is no economic value in Cuba. There's no strategic value to Cuba. And on top of that, once we control their country or occupy it, we then have to pump money into it to turn it into anything, or to at least fix all of the humanitarian crises that the country is constantly in because it's so poor. And really, there's no prize in that. It's basically taking on a burden, to be completely frank, in the middle of a time that we really don't need to be taking on unnecessary burdens. But I hope that does address it the best I can, in my opinion, because I just don't get it at all. And really, the United States doesn't work off of, like, at least in my opinion, kind of like more abstract ideas like a consolation prize. prize, because what good does that do the U.S. citizenry? It doesn't do us any good that the United States as an abstract got a consolation prize. It doesn't benefit a single American citizen at that point. On the other hand, a war with Iran benefits American citizens because we're stopping a nuclear weapon from being hovered over their head from the Iranians. That's beneficial, but nothing we could do with Cuba would ever turn out to truly be beneficial. It'd be detrimental. It would be a tax money pit. But anyways, with that, we're on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Mark. He said, Matt, is destroying a satellite a possibility for the U.S. Star Force?
Yes.
And that is something that is completely a capability of the U.S. Space Force. Also, before it became a Space Force, they were working on technology to pretty much, I would say, disassemble satellites. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to find the right word for that. There are ways for the United States to send up a orbital vehicle and actually pick apart satellites. There was recently an article that was out in the public a while back that China had recently developed that capability, basically a destroyer of satellites, essentially. And the U.S. has had that, and we've been experimenting with that for a long time. So we don't even need an EMP. We can simply send around an orbital vehicle, pick apart the enemy satellite, and destroy it that way without having to detonate an EMP or anything that can create an electromagnetic pulse. But Enforcer, what say you?
We actually do have a force for that in the Space Force, and it's specifically Space Delta 9, which is the orbital warfare delta of the Space Force. The Space Force doesn't have brigades or squadrons or anything like that, like the Air Force or the Army or any other sort of an organizational unit that exists conventionally. They actually operate off of the Delta structure. And Space Delta 9 is the only unit in the entirety of the Space Force that works on orbital warfare. But orbital warfare generally uses, at the moment, the X-37B and a couple of other methods to be able to either physically attach themselves to a satellite and try and hack into it or render it inoperable while in orbit, or it can use the Canadarm, I believe that's inside of this thing, to actually alter the trajectory of the satellite into a decay orbit or a rapid decay orbit to see that it gets flung into the atmosphere and burned up in re-entry. So those are some of the available methods that we have to be able to deal with enemy satellites, and that is all done through Space Delta 9. Every single bit of it. There's no other Space Delta in the Space Force that does that, and there's also no other force in the entirety of the armed forces that specializes in this role. So I hope that does address it the best I can. I also got to say, folks, I actually know some people who are in Space Delta 9, and of course they can't say a lot about what they do, but the one thing that they did tell me, and I take this at face value, is that it is an absolutely cool job, and I would not doubt that whatsoever, because it's got to be an incredibly cool job. It has to be. But anyways, with that, we are on to the actually another super chat. So Matthew, what do we got?
We also have a 10 from Wantan Quadruple A. He said, I love you guys. I might be the jokester, but you guys are the news logic. We need it in these dark times in LSA.
And thank you so much for the support, and thank you for the kind words, and help with this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a 5 from Game Theory who said, rods from God.
An interesting concept, to be sure, Game Theory, and a huge thanks to you for the support. And with that, we're on to the next one.
I still remember trying to disable that thing in that mission. I don't think it worked. But we also have a 2 from DWRB who said F-15 did it first.
That's actually true. It did it with the AIM-135 ASAT. This is a picture of that F-15 actually shooting down that satellite right here.
It shot down a satellite, did it?
Yeah, it actually did. The F-15 went to a high altitude, and this AIM-135 was specially designed to where the F-15 could just angle up, lock onto a satellite, fire off that AIM-135, and that AIM-135 would be able to go exo-atmospheric and shoot down the satellite. And it actually was a successful test, which proved that the U.S. could use F-15s in theory, and this was the only time this was ever done, and we don't really know if they would do that nowadays, but this proved that in theory, the U.S. Air Force could actually engage and shoot down enemy satellites in low Earth orbit.
That's impressive.
Yeah, pretty cool sort of a weapon system right there. Really neat, honestly. But I hope that does address that incredibly well, DWRB. You are absolutely correct on that. And a big thanks to you for support. And with that, we're on to the third to last question of the night.
And this is actually the second to last question of the night. This one goes to Robin, who said, chances of preemptive moves this weekend. And what say you?
Oh, well, there's definitely always a possibility for that. And considering that the ceasefire looks to be lapsing soon with no chance of it being extended, I have a feeling that we'll probably be seeing high chance that there's going to be some sort of preemptive moves this weekend. I would be definitely sure of that. And so I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the final question of the night. And so who is the lucky last person to throw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is AF Kaplan. He said, if this Strait of Hormuz standoff lasts long enough, what is the danger of U.S. forces running out of fuel and thus being dead in the water?
Generally, the U.S. military would always be prioritized for fuel consumption here in the United States, so they will not run out of fuel for a long time. It's really more so the civilian side of things here in the country, like you and me, that have to worry about fuel consumption and fuel shortages. But the military would always be prioritized at the very top for fuel, because if the military runs out of fuel before everyone else, then there's no way to defend everything else that we have here in the country. Meaning that it has to grind to a halt last before everything else. So I hope that does address that the best I can. It's be a very long time, probably years before they ever ran out of fuel in reality. But with that, we actually have one last super chat to address. So Matthew, what do we got?
And this one goes to Jonas Kanobis, who puts in a €6. He said, while U.S. troops are in the Baltics, do you think Russia and Belarus would still try invading these countries?
They might try, and I'm not entirely sure if it's a guarantee, but they could try at any point. If their economic situation is untenable, that means that they could try no matter the condition, because it wouldn't really matter. They're still going to go to the same nuclear card at the end of it all to try and force our hand to compromise with them. So I hope that does address that the best I can. A big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that in mind, folks, we've reached the end of tonight's stream. I've got to say that we're entirely honored and greatly appreciative of so many of y'all supporting this channel and also watching with your time. We're greatly appreciative of that. We still have 10,000 people here almost, which is unbelievable for almost 4 hours in. I thank you all for being around that long. And we've also had 150,000 people watch this stream before it ended and 20,000 people here at the peak. We thank you all greatly once again for watching, and we hope you all have enjoyed this greatly. We will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the news from around the world. And if we have any news in the middle of the day to make a short war video, Enforcer Matt will be the one making that short war video tomorrow. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukrainian, Ram Slava, long live the Lee Spring Army, and long live the Republic.
And also a huge shout out to the 150,000 people that were here tonight. And that's a lot of people. We appreciate every single one of you for being here at the end of the stream tonight. And we will see you all tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern to cover the rest of the news on Friday evening. And also, of course, if there is enough news for a short war video, I'll be putting that out midday tomorrow. And we'll have to see what happens. Because, of course, these days, every day you wake up, something crazy happens. And sometimes bad things happen. Sometimes good things happen. We'll just have to see. It could be anything. But in the meantime, though, thank you all for joining us once again, and of course, Slava Ukraine, Heroam Slava, get some rest, and good night.
On